tiny people, then we play with them. Ooh, ooh. We paint tiny people, then we play with them.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Miniatures Monthly at the Crate and Crowbar. My name is Chris Thurston, and as ever I am joined by Tom Senior.
Good day.
Hello Tom.
Hello.
We're cracking open a cold one.
It's lovely.
With some lads.
The heat wave is over, and now we can just sit around and drink beer and talk about miniatures.
Indeed. Yeah, it's been so hot this week, not to skip ahead to what we've been painting, but it's been so hot that I had to move my entire painting setup from our conservatory into the living room, because within a minute of being in the conservatory, I would sweat so much, the sweat would go into my eyes and I would no longer be able to see.
That's a sad state of affairs.
It is.
That's why it should never be hot in Britain, really.
Yeah. And indeed, actually, we went away last weekend and I was so worried because I found a new thing that I'm doing is when I'm painting or working on a particular project or an army, to give myself sort of inspiration, I set up everything I've painted for that force. So in this case, my Thousand Suns, where I can see them in the nice light of the conservatory, because it feels then it's like, this is what I'm working on. It's not just betting on a long, grueling project. It's nice to be able to see them and have this sense of this growing collection, growing army. And I realized to my horror, we were away at a friend's wedding party, and we've realized to my horror that they had been left out on the side in our conservatory during this heat wave. And I was a 3-hour train journey from home. There was no fixing this, but I did find myself nervously Googling, like, what happens to miniatures in the sun? And I found a useful thread from a couple of years ago, somebody talking about leaving their miniatures in a hot car, which is very similar in terms of a hot box, basically. And plastic miniatures are mostly fine.
Hey.
They can survive that. And indeed, they were mostly fine. Resin probably will get a bit bendy and dodgy. So there's my tip number 1 for the month. Don't do it anyway, because it's definitely not worth doing just because.
Just to test it out.
Yeah. But maybe in this heat that we're having, particularly if it returns, take care of your resin, friends.
The mental image of you coming back to see your Thousand Suns turn into a kind of glittering red puddle.
Well, it's the flesh change. It's like,
no, not again.
This is why we have to turn them all into dust. So I was very afraid of the flesh change setting in, but it did not. No. So that's my...
Excellent.
Yeah. Cause I had that, we were working so hard on the Burning of Prospero set that I had this nightmare scenario where I have to tell you, like...
It's all gone.
I've melted all my suns.
It's been a long project, that one. Still not finished for me.
We'll get onto that later because that's gonna feature. So news this month is kind of 40k, right?
For sure.
New edition of Warhammer 40,000 8th edition came out 2 weeks ago now. Mm-hmm. However, a week ago.
Yeah.
I can do time. That's how that works. Obviously, so that's huge news. We're going to get into that in a pretty big way. But there was something else that they've done which might be interesting to people, particularly people who've been drawn to Age of Sigmar from our previous discussions of it, which is a sort of quiet re-release or new edition of the core set for Age of Sigmar, along with a few releases around that. And actually, it's kind of interesting what they've chosen to do, because I think, I don't know if you agree, Tom, but I felt that, like, everything from the presentation of New 40k to the way they've released it shows off the lessons they've learned from Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, for sure.
And some of those things as an Age of Sigmar player first make you a little bit jealous, because it's like, oh man, but actually they've done some things with this that they've not even done with 40k. So, it's called Thunder and Blood, and what it is basically exactly the same content of the original starter box, minus 3 models. So you don't get, Vander's Hammerhand, who's the Stormcast Eternal Celestin on Dracoth model that you use as a different character.
Yeah.
You don't get Korgus Kull, who is the Khorne Lord with a big dog. And you don't get the Bloodsecrator, which is still the stupidest word in Warhammer.
Yes.
Who is the very important, for a Khorne army, totem bearer who opens a big portal to the realm of chaos, which definitely isn't magic, because Khorne hates magic. It's just opening a door like any other door.
It's just pure, it's like that thing in The Shining, basically.
The Blood Skull door, yeah. Basically open a big lift, all the blood comes out.
Yeah.
You don't get those 3, but you get everything else in that box, which is 2 pretty substantial forces. On obviously the rules and things. I think a smaller version of the book that came with the old core set.
Right.
However, they've done some interesting things, I think, with a view to making the game more accessible. One is that the Khorne miniatures are on a red plastic sprue, and the Stormcast miniatures are on a gold plastic sprue.
Hooray.
Which is 90% of painting
mode.
them.
That's fantastic. Just give that a wash and you're done, basically.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And then the other thing they've done is the lower half of the box it's still a box, but it's designed to look like a building, so you can use it as a little piece of terrain. And it comes with a fold-out mat to give you instant play space, something to play on.
Yeah, it's real nice. It's just, the difference, the big thing they've obviously tried to do is have it shorten the time between opening the box and actually playing a game. So you just open up the flat pack, you put your mat down, and then I guess, are they snap fit? Are they easy to
Yeah,
assemble anyway?
they're all snap fit models, or at least monopose models.
So you just clip them out, put them together, and that's it then. And
then you've got an all red force and an all gold force, which is a step up from grey versus grey, right?
Yeah, it does look a lot better. It does look a lot better.
Which is super interesting, because there was one of the rumours earlier in the year, which has proven to be true across the board, is that GW were sort of going to stratify their games so that AOS was the entry-level game, with obviously competitive headroom, but at a very basic level, the simplest of the three games. 40k was somewhere in the middle, and then Horus Heresy, which is sticking with 7th edition 40k rules, was the heady, top-end, arguably bloated game. And this seems to fit that, because the other side of this is that box is 50 quid, which impressed me when I saw it. That's the same price as a Start Collecting box.
Yeah, it is. You get a lot of models. I think the Khorne Force especially is a bit incomplete without the Blood Separator. It's designed to function around those kind of buff banner pieces, and taking that out is a little bit of a shame for them.
But I would argue that this is a more impressive start collecting box for Stormcast than the start collecting box for Stormcast is.
Yeah,
the start collecting Stormcast box is the Celestant on foot, 2 Retributors, 5 Liberators, and 3 Prosecutors. Just from I think, if it is everything else, right, that's the Relictor, the Heralder.
Oh, the Heralder's not in there.
Oh, he's not in there?
No, he's a separate dude.
Okay, so it's
those great, really great.
Yeah, so it's the Relictor, 2 squads of Liberators, 3 Paladins, and 3 Prosecutors?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And yeah, you're right, that is just straight up better.
For the same price.
Same price, yeah, that's a really good point. And then you can just use your Khorne bits and pieces to make blood tornadoes like I did last month, or just have a bits box of just random legs and stuff.
Well, I mean, people don't realize if they don't play like super competitive Age of Sigmar, but you need like a blood tornado per unit ideally. They're like rhinos.
Absolutely right.
Like
transport in
exactly
in the realms. Yeah.
Everyone just arrives
via blood tornado.
Blood tornado.
There are a lot of tornadoes in AOS actually, aren't there?
I've got to apologise to you, Tom, because when I cropped the image for the blood tornado on the splash art for the last episode, I had no idea when I was doing it that I had turned it into a big blood cock.
Yes. The more you look at it, the worse it gets. So we apologise.
I mean, and this is not only maybe a violation of YouTube's content policy, but also broadly a violation of the sort of Chaos Pantheon, because the two gods, Khorne and Slanesh are on diametrically opposed corners.
It's a Slaneshi trick, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Cropped into that particular angle.
Lol.
Truly grotesque.
Yeah. And because I did it by accident, therefore it was Zinch's fault. So yeah, but nonetheless, I think it's worth mentioning that box because it is interesting as a way of getting into the hobby, providing you want one of those 2 forces.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing that's sort of interesting around that is they've now released the Vanda's Hammerhand model and the Korgur's Cull model and the Blood Secretor model as 2 separate boxes that you can sort of bolt on. But you don't really have to. And the nice thing about it is that means that, like, for example, the Blood Secretor is now available outside of that core box, even though he still comes with Vanda's Korgur's Cull, which is a frustrating bit.
Get Chaos Lord with every one of them, because you need more than one of those Blood Secretors really to be effective.
So yeah, free Chaos Lord with every...
Strange way to bundle those, actually.
I think it's because they're on the same sprue, and they haven't
sense.
redone the sprues. They've just made them in different plastic. So it does feel like a bit of a kind of consolidation of existing effort, because AOS is in such a down, like a blank period.
Yes.
Like there's been nothing.
Understandably.
So there's been nothing since Skirmish, and Skirmish is a booklet, so.
The other thing they did announce is that they're going to release a separate book for their kind of narrative army play. Which I've completely forgotten the name of. Realm?
Oh God.
What's it called?
Path to Glory.
Path to Glory, that's it. Yeah, Path to Glory. So this was in the General's Handbook, and it was a very basic loose set of instructions as to how to build your army from force to force, and it came with some sort of persistent units.
Yeah, so it's somewhere between full AOS and Skirmish.
Yeah.
So the more battles you play, the bigger your army gets, but rather than thinking about individual men's that you're adding units at a time.
And you've got a kind of flow chart of missions. So if a force loses a certain mission, you segue into a different type of mission to give your kind of multi-game narrative context to it. And they're going to blow that out and kind of expand it and put it into its own book, to be released TBC when it's coming out. But, it sounds like, an interesting lean towards the narrative side of things for AOS, just as 40k is kind of going all out on everything. But, with a big gaming focus, I would say, AOS is kind of showing its narrative side, and maybe that will be the focus going forwards, or maybe it just happens to be that's what the releases are like right now.
Yeah. And I think there's a mixture of I think they're finding a good identity for AOS, because obviously General's Handbook 2 is very close as well, which is probably going to be next month's news, I imagine.
Hopefully.
I think it's rumored for next month or month after. But it also feels like everything that's happening with AOS is stuff that doesn't involve new models, basically, or substantial new announcements or new rules.
Yeah.
Like Kharadron Overlords were the big faction release, and there's, 40k is just taken over. I wouldn't be surprised if every part of Games Workshop's manufacturing facility right now is just generating Dark Imperium boxes.
Cranking out those Space Marines.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Forge Worlds, they're going to make one thing.
They're going to, yeah.
It's Primaris.
They've learned how to make a new thing. And that's
very
total blasphemy.
Yeah, which is amazing. We'll talk more about that later, I suppose.
Yeah, I imagine we will. So, maybe that's our way into
sure.
new 40k coming out. So, obviously we last month we had played it. But now it's properly out. Tom, have you haven't picked up any parts of it yet? Or?
Not yet. So I'm going to pick it up next Friday when I get paid. So to go to get GW, get my big box of men.
It's a good big box of men.
Yeah, I can't wait to open it all up and have a look at the rule book and everything.
So, I did, invest in the end. I didn't think I was going to, but just basically, I had this, what I realized is that, despite having other projects on, those models are so good. I was just I was playing with the store demo copy because they came out a bit earlier in my friendly local game store. And I kind of realized I want to paint every model in this box. And that's the thing that clicked it for me.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have weirdly, I wouldn't have bought one and split it, because that means I'm starting an army.
Yeah.
And I'm committing to that. What I realized was I love every model in that box. I really like the Primaris Marines. The Death Guard are beautiful models and they're really fun to paint. And I'm excited about what's coming next for the Primaris specifically. I want to paint that Dreadnought.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But more in a kind of I'm collecting these models. We'll see about the game side of it. And then that realization that, because I was going to get the rule book. Obviously the rule book's in that box and it's the same lovely hardback thing. And so the rest of it's just sort of a bonus. So it made sense, particularly because, and this is maybe a good tip for people, is a lot of independent stores do discounts. And so because I'm a member of my local store, I got a relatively hefty, 20% off on it. So it was it was a nice kind of obviously it's an expensive indulgence, but this hobby is generally, and that felt okay, that's my indulgence for the next month and a bit.
Yeah, I think that set seems completely worth it to me, given the number and quality of the models in the hardback book, and just the kind of stuff that comes in there, the range rule, isn't it?
Well, they're close to 1,000-point armies, much closer than I think the Age of Sigmar set got.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I think it was if I was really disinterested in one of the factions, then I probably would have stepped away from it. But because both of them were yeah, okay, I can see myself collecting both of these. That was the thing.
Yeah, which is surprising for Death Guard, because I've never had any interest in Plague Marines at all. But those models have just instantly swung me towards. I mean, I don't think I necessarily would collect them, but I'll paint that box.
Yeah, we'll definitely go on talking about that as well. Because those things are really cool. And it's a really nicely presented, it feels like it's a very well considered set of things you get in that box. I mean, there's been a billion unboxing videos. Most people don't need to be told this, but, it's got the best box I've seen GW do. It's not just a box of stuff. All of the sprues are in their own box within the box, which is sealed with a purity seal, because of course it is.
Nice.
And that is not just a presentation thing. It means that they feel like they're being kept a bit safer, and they're you've got somewhere to store them, which is nice.
Yeah, that's good.
And then the book, because I think it's because it contains the hardback, so it needs to protect the sprues from the hardback.
Right, yeah.
And then that's in its own enclosure, and then beneath that enclosure is things like the dice. There's a folding card version of the core rules, which is really nice to have, and 2 mini codexes for the 2 factions in the book. So the 2 factions in the box, and just other sort of bits and bobs. They've done a really nice job with the new I'll use it for other things. I think 12-inch range ruler,
Right.
Because it's like a floppy plastic transparent ruler rather than just a stick.
Yeah.
So you can sort of place it over things and see through it,
Very
which
useful.
is a nice idea. So yeah, just a solid thing. I also bought the index book for Chaos because obviously that relates to my Tzeentch demons, which I've got for AOS, but I can use straight away. And those books, so I assumed they'd be equivalent to those very early like Allegiance books for Age of Sigmar,
Just
which
cover
is,
to cover rules.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, that's what I thought.
and they are pretty much, but actually like there's a couple of pages at the start, 4 to 8 pages at the start of, fluff and nice drawings. A lot of art you might have seen before, but like some of the art from Disciples of Tzeentch shows up, but that's not that unexpected.
Yeah.
So it gets you up to speed on things. And then there's even like splash pages for all of like the major Chaos subfactions, just to kind of explain to you what is a World Eater, what is a Thousand Sun, and little kind of like boxed out kind of like, this is their deal. Like, there's a little box out on Prospero, for example. Like,
that's nice.
Especially because Prospero's, now that there's been plot developments and the Thousand Suns have kind of reclaimed their home, like there's all that stuff kind of gets you up to speed on that. And the rules are nicely presented, and yeah, and it kind of feels like, especially because they're selling them for 15 quid, that seems like a really good kind of move. Like I'd be pretty confident picking one up. Not to see if I was interested in an army, but because I've already got those models, it feels like a really good way to kind of jump in with that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I can't wait to pick it up. I'm not even sure when I'll get around to painting it, to be honest. But because I want to kind of concept out what I want to do with 40k before I properly start putting models together, really.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to come up with plans for that. So we could talk about that, or we could talk about the new book.
Well, should we talk about the setting? Because that will probably lead to our plans.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Because so the setting has changed a lot more than I thought it had. So the new core book has a really good long introduction to how the Imperium is structured. It's very focused on the Imperium. I think if you were like the world's biggest like Orc or Tau fan, it's probably a bit disappointing how focused it is on the Imperium and Chaos.
Yeah.
But I guess it's such a big setting that they've chosen to start somewhere. But it goes into a lot of detail. Like it explains the Navis nobility, like it explains the structure of Imperial rule, what the Astronomicon is and why that's important, and like in the structure of, from first principles. So if you're kind of not used to 40k, then it's a good introduction to that. But the thing that really gives you a look into the new setting is the novel that's been released time with this, which is called Dark Imperium.
Yeah.
Like the set.
Yeah.
And like a different novel.
Oh, yeah.
Confusingly enough, this is the one by Guy Haley. And
Okay.
also, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I've read it all. Tom, you've read most?
I think I've read about a third of the way in, I think. So I've got past the setup, which fascinating if you're into this universe.
Yeah, so it opens, it gave me, because I'm up to the 4th book of the Horus Heresy series.
Oh, yeah.
So catching up from the opposite direction.
Yes.
Dark Imperium opens with what everyone thought was like Guilliman's death, basically. Sort of right at the end, not even in the heresy, end of the post-heresy era, with first a space battle and then with Guilliman and his sort of bodyguard invading Fulgrim, who's the Primarch of the Emperor's Children. So the most Slaneshi.
Yeah, he's gone full demon as well in that.
Yeah.
Basically describes the model that might happen in the future.
He's turned into a big sexy snake, man.
Sure has. That's a weird image in my mind, but yeah.
Yeah, particularly because Fulgrim is in a lot of the earlier books as just like a very charismatic dude who's kind of chill.
With lovely hair.
Yeah.
And then suddenly this.
Exactly.
He's got 4 arms.
What price, lovely hair?
He's still got lovely hair, I think.
Yeah, he does, yeah. I think Guilliman even makes a note, like, it's like, remember who you were, Fulgrim! That person's still in there. You still got that lovely hair.
Beautiful coif.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's quite brutal and, interesting. Though I was kind of more interested in the massive time skip that happens.
Yeah.
After that point.
Because, so Guilliman, was resurrected or brought out of the coma that he was brought out of stasis, because he was put in stasis to preserve himself. And then he's been brought back, by a mixture of people. Including Belisarius Call, who's the mechanic of Archmados, who's very important now, and the Eldar, weirdly.
Yeah.
They helped.
He's filthy Xenos technology.
But at what cost, etc.
Yeah.
But I think you said it, but like I was expecting, they've been talking about the Indomitus Crusade a lot, It's like, this is Guilliman's return to the galaxy with this crusade to unite the fractured Imperium.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be
Yeah,
the thing.
nope.
Right? It's not at all.
So the new fiction picks up 150 years later as the Indomitus Crusade ends,
Yes.
which is really interesting for a bunch of different reasons. One is that obviously it means that, so people who are kind of concerned about like, how are their Primaris dreadnoughts? How are their Primaris captains? It's because actually the Primaris have now been around for ages and there is still tension with the existing Marines, but they've been around a long time.
Yeah.
The other thing that stood out to me is, I don't know if have you got to the bit with the big parade?
I think they're setting up for the parade.
Right.
In the bit I'm at.
It's explicitly, and Guilliman even notices this, it's an echo of Olenor, which is,
yes, yeah.
At the end of the Great Crusade, which was the Emperor's crusade, when the Emperor decided to go back to Terra to work on his big secret project that ended up dooming the Imperium by accident.
Whoops.
He had a big parade to mark the end of the crusade, and Guilliman does the same thing. And that is the point where really the Horus Heresy begins. And this is the point where the new fiction begins.
Yeah.
And they're explicit echoes of each other.
Yeah, for sure. And in Olenor, the Emperor, leveled a continent. Like a whole continent, they just flattened it out. Like to give you a sense, like you think of parade and you think, oh, people march down the street. No, an entire continent, every single space marine, every single captain, every single, squaddy, like in ranks across a continent with Titans and with, all the dropships, the entire kind of, armada there. And the Emperor at the very center of it, this enormous kind of martial celebration of what's come to pass. And, Guilliman's just doing the same thing, isn't he? They've got these huge kind of rollers going across and just flattening out this space. And,
I actually really liked the book, and it's, I've been really enjoying the Horus Heresy stuff, and obviously, Warhammer novel mileage varies. I think both based on personal preference, but also based on the quality of the books themselves. I really liked this, and one thing that struck me was, obviously there's interesting things about the Primaris specifically, but actually this made me interested in Guilliman, whereas previously I wasn't, because I guess I see the Ultramarines as quite generic feeling sometimes, and he is the kind of goody two-shoes Primarch in a lot of ways, so, he's not even like, of the good Primarchs, he's always seemed like the one with the fewest problems.
Right.
Like, like, the Lion is a dickhead, Sanguinius might be a vampire,
vampirism.
Like, Lehman Ross might be a werewolf.
Yep. We covered that.
Ferrus Manus, well,
it's called Ferrus Manus.
It's called Ferrus Manus. Who else we got? We've got Rogel Dawn is chill, but really likes to go into something called the pain glove while making decisions.
I didn't know that about him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Imperial Fists are addicted to pain.
Wow.
Like they have this thing. They clothe themselves in the pain glove so that they can experience more pain than they would ever experience on the battlefield. So they're not afraid of anything.
Shake it off. Wow.
They don't give a shit about anything, basically.
That's awesome.
But that's how they make, like, when Dawn, because Dawn initially rejected the Codex Astartes, which was Guilliman's restructuring of the legions, so the Horus Heresy couldn't happen again. He rejected it, and they fell out. And then he went off, sort of lost a battle, spent some time in the pain glove, and came out like, no, we do want to do this.
Yeah.
So, the Imperial Fists have a sort of Nurgle followers devotion to fucking themselves up, which is like, so yeah, they're all a bit fucked up. And then there's Guilliman in the middle, who's just like, it is like, he's the like the Michael from Arrested Development of the Primarchs.
He actually wants to form a society, but at the same time he's self-aware and he knows that the Space Marines are not really the body to do that. So what's interesting about Dark Imperium is how he's going about trying to fix that. And the enormous culture war he's basically in with the Imperium, who still see him as a god often and worship him directly because he's the son of the Emperor, and who directly worship the Emperor. And Guilliman is like, the Emperor's just a bloke. He completely rejects that because he's from 30k. He's from the era when the imperial truth was everything.
Yeah, he's met the Emperor when the Emperor was a man.
Yeah. And he's just, no, that's just my dad, and he comes up against this kind of simpering, sycophantic Imperium that's just gone so deranged and so wrong, and he's just desperately trying to find people with common sense.
Yeah. But also the flip side to that is they don't necessarily they don't almost want to believe he is who he really is. Like, they sort of ignore all the things he says about the Emperor not being a god.
Yes.
They're just like, yeah, that's nice, whatever.
Go back to worshipping.
And there's a great description early on of the space battle where Guilliman, it's a good example of why having a Primarch is a big deal. Because he's not just, he's very big and strong and can punch people very hard. It's, he is sort of brilliant at a level. Like, there's a lot of descriptions of how fast he can read. Like, he can just look at a book and it's done.
That's it.
Like,
He's
basically the only person who can hold all of Warhammer 40k 7th edition's rules in his head at the same time.
That's why he's a tactical master.
Yeah. And there's like a bit early on where, during a space battle, it's because of the way his mind works, he's able to see the refresh rate of an enemy's void shield and just fire one shot that penetrates it rather than the 6 days of shots it would take normally. And it's that stuff, but he's filled the bridge of his particular ship with new technology made by Call, and there's a good description of all of the Mechanicus adepts just sort of walking around looking at it, because it's heresy. It's all heresy. They've changed some of the designs. They're using stuff that wasn't extracted from some ancient STC construct 10 millennia ago, and they can't handle it. Like,
Guilliman is there.
They're very uncomfortable about it.
He's delighted because they've got him an 8% efficiency boost out of the systems, and these tech priests are just kind of screaming in their minds because everything has been turned upside down by this guy who just basically installed Windows 10 for Windows 8. He's just going to give it a little upgrade, and they're freaking out about it, which is that's a really cool point of friction in the new within the Imperium.
Yeah,
which is obviously it's very literally represented by the actual split in the Imperium, the giant warp scar across the galaxy.
And it's interesting as well because it without spoiling things, because obviously you haven't finished the book yet, but like it doesn't just bang the drum. Guilliman is right. Like, Guilliman's allowed to have doubts about that stuff. Particularly, particularly as he starts to, because he's extremely rational, almost to a fault.
Yeah.
But he starts to try and figure out, is there a rational case for the Emperor being a god? Like, how do you define God?
Yeah.
Like, because they can't deny that the Emperor hid the truth of the Chaos Gods. He can't deny that. So the truth of the Chaos Gods is manifestly true to him. Like, they exist. So could the Emperor, you know what I mean? Like, so there's an interesting kind of struggle there. It's not necessarily, particularly because even the Marines he's dealing with are devout.
Yeah.
There's a really nice, this maybe brings us on to the stuff that might practically affect people in the game is, Guilliman is the person who wrote the Codex Astartes, and that is the book if you are a Space Marine and not every chapter adheres to it, but it is the process by which the legions were broken down into chapters, and it dictates how they structure themselves, how they fight. And it's an extremely rigid set of rules, and it was designed by Guilliman to prevent any one legion having the power that the legions had, and therefore reducing the damage if there was ever another event like the Heresy, which it's successful in doing because whole chapters have gone to chaos.
But they're still in contention.
Yeah. And they're not big enough to turn half the Imperium against itself again.
Yeah, and he knows chaos so well that he knows that chaos fights itself as well. So that's one thing he constantly uses against the enemy. That's one of the ways he does it.
And, but the thing is that it's sort of effective, and like everything Guilliman does, like it's effective, very logical, very kind of cold and calculated, practical bit of project management, basically.
Yeah.
Space and project management. However, 10,000 years later, it's worshipped as basically a holy text by the chapters that adhere to it. And he's changing it all the time. Like, he's come along and started to change it to match the new war that they're fighting. And so his own commanders are very uncomfortable about the fact that, like, there's a description a bit deeper in the book as a Primaris becomes a new Ultramarines captain, which makes him an 11th captain, which you can't have in a Codex compliant chapter like the Ultramarines. And there's a good description of, I think it's Marnius Calgar, was the chapter master of the Ultramarines, who is explicitly having to deal with some kind of professional, what do you do when the big man comes back issues.
Yes.
And he's like, he has to kind of just accept it as a matter of course, like, oh, I guess we have 11 companies now. Oh, okay. And like, and it's just like, cause it's just like, he has to accept that because the man who wrote the original book has done it. But there's a brilliant, this is no spoilers, but there's a great bit later in the book of Marnius Calgar looking very uncomfortably at Guilliman because Guilliman is sat in a big chair. And they've had this big chair for 10,000 years. And it's basically a holy relic because it's Guilliman's chair from his office. But to Guilliman, it's just a fucking chair. It just happens to be a chair that's big enough for him. And so, and Calgar is smart enough to know that, of course, it's just a chair, but he can't shake that side of himself that's been around for hundreds of years, venerating every inch of ground that Guilliman walked on. And Guilliman's just a guy who doesn't believe any of it.
Like, he comes back and they've kept all of his quarters in his battleship completely as they were. In that creepy way, it's all become a shrine. And then he's just walking around reading stuff and just throwing things around. He's got a tiny, like, common sense thinking room that he goes into. the rational room, which is like only slightly larger than him. He goes in there just to get a fuck away.
And explicitly, it's the only room in 40k that doesn't have like fucking filigree on it.
Yes,
like he's made a room for himself that isn't the most Baroque cube imaginable,
Yeah.
just so he has somewhere to think, because
He hates the fashion of the era as well.
Yeah.
Like he has this kind of aesthetic disgust for the Gothic affectations that the Imperium has developed over the last 10,000 years. He thinks it's kind of gauche.
Yeah.
You know, he just thinks it's just overworked. It's, you know, it should be his battleship. It should be clean lines.
There's a bit later on where he laughs at a statue of himself.
Really? That's awesome.
Like, and so all that stuff I think has made Guilliman a much more compelling character.
Yes,
Because also the nice thing about it is it's also, he knows, because he's so logical and rational, sees things very clearly, that he's not the most powerful Primarch. He's probably the least. Like, every Primarch has a thing. Like, Magnus is the best psyker. Mortarion is the master of death when it comes to himself as well. So he's just supernaturally durable. Leman Russ is, you know, ferocious, all the rest of the stuff. And Guilliman is like, he's literally the one with a bit of perspective, which is the lamest thing to be.
Right, that's his superpower.
And like, he's not the most charismatic. And it's when he realizes that he kind of has to be Horus, like he has to be the War Master. Like that's his new role. He has to be like what Horus could have been, but there's all those dangers that come with being Horus.
Yeah. Quite centralized power, that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he has to centralize power. Like there's loads of really interesting meditations. If you're into the bureaucracies of the mad space empire.
Yeah,
then,
absolutely.
Then I think it's really interesting.
Even, he's introducing, you know, amazing new concepts such as, what if someone's ill or injured, you send them back to be treated in hospital so they can come back into the fight? That's like a generational shift for the Imperium where they're just like, well, if you're dead, you know, why would we expend fuel on shipping you back to a hospital planet? And I think it's called Guilliman's Mercy or something.
Guilliman's Mercy, yeah.
That's it. Which is just basic hospital care for Astra Militarum members, which is, you know, that's a funny point. It shows you how dark things have gotten. Yeah. And dark things still are.
Well, I think that's one of the things more broadly that's interesting to me about 40k, like why I like it as a sci-fi setting, independent of the games and the models and things that I enjoy about it. Because it is explicitly silly and it's, you know, I think how seriously you can take it, is limited in some senses by how it's evolved out of so many different things that, you know, it's evolved out of 2000 AD comics and Michael Moorcock and mad names that people thought were funny in a room in 1993. And so that guy's called that forever and this stuff. But I think the thing that's fundamentally interesting about it is, it shows a world that is fucking awful from the point of view of people who live there for whom that is normal. And if it's about anything, it seems to be about how much shit can become normal.
Right.
Like, and there's so many, like, one of the interesting things about the way the Imperium functions is even though it's always on the edge of destruction, it's always expanding. Planets get destroyed all the time. They destroy their own planets. Billions of people die all of the time because the one thing that isn't a precious resource in the 41st millennium is human life. Like, it's sort of, if it's an apocalyptic scenario for any particular reason, and it's basically an apocalyptic scenario for all of them, because every kind of apocalypse has happened in 40k.
Yeah.
It's kind of an overpopulation apocalypse. It's like, human life is just completely abundant. It's everywhere, and it's constantly happening. And it just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. And there are colony ships going out every single hour and founding new colonies, and they grow up and become hive mega worlds, because the timescale is so large. And so, no one thinks twice about human life. Really, who's in any position of power, and everyone else's life is kind of brutal and short and kind of merciless and cold. And that is it's grim, obviously. That's kind of what the setting is. But I don't think it's inhuman. I think it's just interesting how impersonalized it becomes, because you take this idea. And I think it's also one of the other ways to think about how like sexless the 40k universe is. Because it is a lot of, like, Space Marines are infertile. You know, they don't have sexual desire either. So they're just sort of, and they're all men who've come up with their own sort of form of, like love with each other. Like there's a lot of talk of like brotherly love and like,
brothers,
but it's not even, you know, it's not momentary. It's like genuine love. Like there's a sort of like kind of strange platonic, naivety to Space Marines, because they have no sexual function at all. They don't feel it. They don't think it. They don't, you know what I mean? They're just, you know, they're like Ken dolls or murderous,
really
hyper religious Ken dolls.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that sort of, I don't think it's the reason that the 40k setting is so sexless. I think that has to do with where it comes from as a piece of fiction to serve a game. But I think one of the things that kind of allows it to become an interesting theme is that, like, at the distance remove it is from human life, where human life is just so abundant and so like individual acts of like sex or romance mean basically nothing in that setting because it's happening all the time everywhere, and it just happens off camera to fill up another planet with problems. Like,
yeah, it's an interesting take on the post-scarcity society, which you normally read as being, you know, a time of hedonism and, but in a good way where, you know, possessions mean less and, you know, people are more free to go and do whatever they want because there's infinite space and infinite resources to do so.
Yeah.
But this is this is an interesting take on what might actually happen where people don't have to be good to each other really at all. There's no kind of cultural cash or worth in setting up a society that actually cares for anyone.
Yeah.
It's better to create a bureaucracy that creates weapons faster because that's, you know, there's an existential threat on your doorstep all the time. And that threat squashes all kind of room there is for empathy or for any, you know,
it's a tremendously wasteful system that uses people as fuel, but no one spares a thought for they have no way of making it more efficient. No. So the vast human waste isn't even considered.
But what's happened in 40K is that what's interesting about Guilliman's bringing this back is that they've lost the concept of what life outside of war would be like. It doesn't exist for them. Like they couldn't conceive of it. And when Guilliman starts thinking about that stuff, it's heretical thought because, you know, anything you're doing that isn't part of a war effort, though Guilliman does massively kick up the war effort, like he's able to introduce concepts such as like mercy in hospitals and, you know, that type of support that, you know, tech priests could not even understand why you would do that. Yeah. The implants in a person are worth more than the person. And
it also helps obviously chaos is deeply, like, it's an explicitly magical force, and that's one of the things that sets it aside. Like, the thing that makes chaos not another alien threat is that other alien threats are part of the same kind of endless cycle of material consumption and war as everyone else, and chaos is just out beyond all of it. They don't adhere to the laws of physics. They just, you know, they don't give a shit about anything because they're not from this reality, and this reality is a plaything. But they also all represent sort of like human qualities that don't all have everything to do with war necessarily. Right. That's like, you know,
like creativity and art.
Yeah, creativity, art. Like, I mean, I suppose corn is the very martial one.
Yeah.
But even that has things, you know, to do with like, you know, passion and proving yourself as an individual, which doesn't mean a lot in that setting. You know, Nurgle's all to do with sort of accepting things that come your way and just ending. You know what I mean? Like sort of decaying and ending. Slanesh is sort of like excessive pleasure, which has no role in that society at all. Seems is all about hope, and wanting to change the situation you're in, which is blasphemy. So they all, you know what I mean? There's sort of an interesting tension in why chaos might be appealing to people.
Yeah, definitely. You can see the temptation. You can see why people would go that way. Given would you live in a hive world, or, you know, would you go along with some plague marines and, you know, take Nurgle's gifts as they come? And
you're going to end up a big old pile of buboes vomiting flies out of your bum forever. Yeah. But at least you don't have to work in a factory until you get squashed in a big gear and no one notices.
The two fates that await you in 40K, basically.
Exactly. It's a way to ignore the means of production.
Yeah, it's a side
turn into a tentacle, which is
it's a good way out.
A lot of that stuff is stuff that's just sort of about 40K generally, which I think they're doing a good job of zooming in on. Some of the things that I think the book introduces are super interesting. Some of the things it introduces and moves past. But it might be worth talking about the Primaris specifically, because if people were a bit unsure about the way they introduced the Primaris and the notion that they are new space marines from under the ground, and there are 10,000 of them.
They were here all along.
There's a couple of key facts. One is that obviously enough time has passed that Primaris have been on multiple campaigns, things like that. The other is that a lot of the people who would become Primaris were sort of seconded from the regular Space Marine recruitment system during the heresy, or just after the heresy. So a lot of Primaris, like Space Marines, don't tend to remember who they were before anyway, because they are extensively brainwashed and given new personalities.
Yes.
But the ones that have some sense of it, knew which planet they were from, that kind of thing, remember the Imperium as it was. So they have some of Guilliman's sense of things.
Interesting.
The other side of it is that they are all a lot more like their Primarchs than modern Marines are. A bit more like Heresy era Marines, because they're from a purer strain of the gene seed. So they display their Primarchs kind of tendencies more outwardly.
Right.
And a super interesting thing that is mentioned, and this is a really interesting hook for the future, is that, again, no huge spoilers for anything, but at one point in the book, Belisarius Cawl, who created the Primaris Marines on Guilliman's orders, basically sends Guilliman a text saying, am I allowed to make Primaris Marines with all of the other gene seeds? As in all of the traitor Primarchs?
Yes.
And the 2 missing Primarchs.
Wow.
He has all of them. He has all 20. So he says, and it doesn't say it like that. He basically lists the legion numbers, because he says we have Primaris for these legions, and it's the 8 loyalist legions. And then he asks, I'm ready to go into production on these ones. And it's like 2 and 11, and 2 and 11 are the missing ones.
Right.
15, so 1,000 Suns, like loads of them.
Whoa, shit.
And Guilliman basically like, absolutely not. But Cole's argument is that it was the Primarchs that fell, not the Marines.
Yes.
And the Emperor intended the 20 to work together. And they were designed to fight together and to combine the various strengths of the Emperor, because each represent different parts of the Emperor, to be brought together. So the Primaris aren't complete without all 20. Yeah. Which is a super interesting
That's really
hook.
cool. That's really cool.
And that, it's a really interesting potential space for it to go. And actually what it reminds me more than anything else of is the bit in Age of Sigmar where Sigmar starts reclaiming Chaos Marines. Right. Reclaiming Chaos Heroes.
Yes.
As Stormcast. It's a similar kind of existential problem. Existing Marines are not going to accept, Belisarius Call saying, I've made some good World Eaters. And they're best friends with Space Wolves because they're basically the same.
And there's, especially when they're exhibiting all of those traits that you'd associate with heresy now. So the bloodlust would be interpreted not as a strength in part of their design, but actually as a manifestation of the chaotic nature of their Primarch. Yeah. Which is a bit unfair perhaps, but yeah, that's
particularly because the Space Wolves aren't.
Yeah, they're exactly the same, but yeah. You say potato,
it's a super interesting idea, and it's
really cool.
given me some interesting thoughts. So the other idea this ties into, so Guilliman shuts that down, as you might expect him to do, but the thing he doesn't shut down is the way he introduces the Primaris initially, which is called battalions that become known as Grey Shields, which are essentially, they're not chapters, they exist outside of the kind of chapter ecosystem.
Oh, cool.
You must have hit these already in the book.
Yeah.
So and they are mixed units of Primaris, where each individual Primaris wears their Primarch's livery, but with a grey chevron over it, which is why they're called grey shields. And the idea is to get Marines from different gene lines used to fighting with each other, so that they cooperate better and they respect each other more when they meet in the future. And this is Guilliman's idea, which is a really good idea.
Yes, for sure.
But during the course of the book, the last of the Grey Shield regiments are disbanded, because after Grey Shields have fought together for a while, they then take the individual Space Marines of specific gene lines and assign them to either existing chapters or new founding chapters based on that gene line. Yeah. So Space Wolves go back to being Space Wolves and that kind of thing, but they'll have this experience having fought with their brethren. Yeah. But it's a really interesting idea for an army.
Yeah, definitely.
If you wanted to paint every single Primaris differently.
Do a Grey Shields army, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Huh, that's super cool.
And it's a super cool kind of, again, kind of heretical progressive concept. The way it's written is it's a bit on the nose, because again, they're a lot more like their Primarchs. So the Space Wolf one is all Viking all the time, and the Iron Hands one is just in his room grafting a new metal arm to himself. And the Blood Angel one is literally just composing poetry in his head as he falls from space.
Fantastic.
Because, it's still silly in 40k. But yeah, I really like that. It does a really good job of describing them as well. It sounds like the book was written as the kind of miniatures range was being put together with some information and some not. But one of the things is that the Inceptors sound like that's kind of a standard way for Primaris to fight. Yeah. They don't use drop pods anymore. They just fall from space.
From orbit, right.
Yeah. Which is kind of rad.
Yeah. The description of them, that drop from space is brilliant, actually, at the very start of that book.
Yeah, and the description of the repulsor tanks also dropping from space.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That image is so awesome. They actually just come in from space, and then at the very last minute, the repulsors come on, and they just sort of almost crash to the ground and come back up with the bolters blazing and, Primaris behind them. I can't wait to have those tanks. I think they're transports for Primaris, aren't they? I
don't think they are. I don't think Primaris get transports.
Yeah, okay. It's too big.
Because they don't fit in rhinos.
No, they're huge. Bigger than a rhino.
There's a great description of a Chaos Space Marine who's never seen a repulsor tank before, tried to dive underneath it to throw a grenade under it, and he just gets immediately flattened, into a paste.
Fantastic.
Also in the book, there's mentions of a whole bunch of Primaris that probably hints at the range to come. And this is maybe our segue to the next thing, because, it seems very likely right now that Space Marines are going to be next month's big thing for 40k. That they're going to get their own codex and that they're going to get, new units, obviously, because there's bits of the Primaris range yet to kind of be revealed, like equivalents. So I wrote them down as they happened in the book.
Ooh.
So, there's the Overlord, which is the new Thunderhawk. Basically, I don't think they'll do a model for it short of Forge World, but it's it carries 40. So it's sort of Stormbird kind of scale. But looks more like a giant Corvus Blackstar, if you know what that looks like from the Deathwatch range.
Yeah,
so it's like a kind of,
I love that ship.
Yeah, I love it as well. It's really cool. Aggressors, which are in Gravis armor, which is the same as the Captain, which is kind of the new Terminator armor.
Yeah.
They have missile racks on the backs and then flamers on each arm.
Oh, awesome.
So that sounds rad. Yep. The Primaris Librarians, which are called Lexicanum.
Interesting.
Just because they needed another Latin word for that.
Damn it.
Yep.
Not to remember.
And Reivers, which are spelled Reiveis, which are basically Primaris scouts. They are like close quarter specialists with like skull masks.
Wow.
And like one big like close quarters pauldron. So if you imagine a Space Marine needed a bigger shoulder pad, yes, they have one big shoulder pad basically.
Oh, that's cool. I was wondering what their assault option would be because they're a very long range army.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to be the scout variant.
Yeah.
I think their assault option will be a variant on Inceptors. I think there will be
sense.
an Inceptor version with
Yeah, that makes sense.
big punchy fists,
Dropping
or
it from
swords or
space.
something. Yeah.
Chain swords.
And yeah, there's loads of interesting stuff in it. So like, I don't think I'd recommend read it on the strength of its novel on its own, but I think if you're kind of excited about new 40k, it's worth reading just to get up to speed because it's sort of...
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the book is a little bit meandering and lacks a bad guy or a kind of purpose.
Yeah, it also doesn't lose its way, but it certainly doesn't have an arc within itself. It feels like the beginning of a big story.
Yeah.
It's sort of satisfying as a beginning that branches off into future things potentially. As a standalone novel, I don't know.
You think of it as a kind of like a whole book of codex flavor text, which just gives you the background and the kind of the base layer that you can start thinking about the hobby from, rather than as kind of like a riveting story in and of itself.
Yeah.
Still very cool though. I really like what they've done with it. They've made Space Marines interesting again.
Yeah. And there's and again, they've created lots of space for future things. Like they establish in the book that the Primaris specifically are quite naive about chaos. And that's one thing that gives the old Space Marines an edge, is the Space Marines that have been fighting chaos for hundreds and hundreds of years and have rigorously protected themselves in their chapters from it are take it much more seriously. Like the Primaris are guilty of being like, well, just shoot it. And like, I got a bit angry. It's fine. And like, and so it doesn't go totally like, what I like about it is it doesn't have a load of like, basically like secular Marines show up to point and laugh at the religious Marines and for them to be totally right about everything and just better at everything and bigger and fightier and everything else. Like the Marines that have been around a long time, like there are some Primaris librarians, but there are a lot of like old Marine chaplains and librarians with the Primaris units because they kind of need them because they're surrounded by chaos all the time and they don't know how to deal with it. And there's a lot of the librarians going like, just don't look at that.
Hand holding basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Through
like,
the apocalypse.
Son, yeah, that's the bad thing. And if you look at it too long, you will turn into mushrooms. So like,
that's really cool. I love, it's interesting that there's going to be a librarian equivalent for the Primaris, especially because, Guilliman went through the whole banned Psyker phase of, the 30k arc. And there seems to be okay with it now, sort of.
Well, he says in the book, and it was very satisfying to me to read, he sees what happened he thinks that basically the Council of Nicaea was probably a mistake, as in banning Psychers, because there's no reason, because he says explicitly he thinks his dad's bad decision making made Magnus an enemy,
right?
Rather than the other way around.
Yeah, he's completely right about that.
Yeah, because he's already encountered Magnus. He encounters Magnus in Gathering Storm. He knows Magnus is still around.
Yeah,
his focus now is Mortarian, but like he doesn't necessarily see Magnus as an out and out enemy, which is interesting.
Yeah,
because the Thousand Sons don't kind of want to be Chaos Marines, so there's like.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, or at least he does, but he understands why that happened and he doesn't see it as Magnus's mistake. Obviously, some parts of it are Magnus's mistake, but like
the bit where he grew wings and killed loads of Space Marines after the fact. It was,
Yeah, he did really double down.
really did. They tend to in Chaos. So I think once you go over to Chaos, that's
In
really,
for a penny, in for a pound,
Absolutely.
I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was kind of, again, it's just down to earth Guilliman going like, well, we fucked up.
Yeah.
So he's a bit more open to it, but yeah. So yeah, it's kind of exciting, like seeing where it's all going. And one interesting thing is that, so people have been doing pictures, including Games Workshop, of Blood Raven Primaris, which are Blood Ravens being the chapter from the Dawn of War games, but very popular. But that's an interesting question, because famously, they don't know who their Primarch is.
No.
And
Has Call been up to?
Yeah. So this is a super interesting idea, because basically they don't know who their Primarch is, but one of the plot points is that everyone gets Primaris from their own chapter. So if you're a Dark Angel, you get the Lion's genes in your Primaris Marines. However, there are a million hints across both heresy books and in other sources that the Blood Ravens are a Thousand Sons successor chapter. That's why they have so many librarians. One of the Thousand Sons cults is called the Corvidae, which is basically, ravens. And one of them, in one of the heresy books, has a vision of like the future of the chapter being a raven covered in blood. And it's like,
Yeah, it's pretty telling.
Yeah. So, but, if they're doing Blood Ravens Primaris, is Guilliman just secretly making them big red men on the sly?
Yeah, or Call is just kind of, maybe it's the second. Oh no.
Oh yeah, Call would be Call. Sorry,
15th. Is it 15th?
Yeah, 15th Legion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take some of that 15th Legion juice. I'm just making Blood Ravens. Don't
Yeah,
worry about it. It's
exactly.
all legit. It's all above board. Don't worry, Guilliman. It's fine.
Yeah, and they're all red. It's like,
Yeah. That colour scheme works so well on Primaris as well.
it does. I considered it, but because of that particular bit of lore jank, I'm not going to commit.
Okay. Yeah, you don't know where that's going to be, how that's going to be resolved, I suppose, in future books and stuff.
So actually, that maybe brings us out of the extended lore phase, but it's good. It's good lore.
It's good lore.
What are your 40k plans? Given that we've both gone from being Age of Sigmar players exclusively to being like,
Let's do all of this now.
Yeah.
Let's play all the systems. Yeah, I'm gonna create a Mechanicum force, definitely. But I think it's gonna be like quite a small one. And because you can be so flexible now with the way you structure your armies in 40k, I'm gonna like basically take a lot of different bits of the Imperium and combine them all into a ragtag, bunch of people defending a Forge World on the Dark Imperium side of the Great Rift. So that'll let me have like some really cool Skitarii and Admech, and then a few assassins, and then a few Primaris that happen to have made it across. And the idea would be that their system is just almost consumed by this warp cloud, and openings appear once every decade or 2 decades. And so the Imperium can kind of sneak in the odd thing, and they can sneak messages out. But it's a very fragmented and difficult situation where all these different Imperium forces have to work together. And I envisage it being like very dark kind of colour schemes for them, and just very kind of stripped down, because they don't have the tools that would necessarily let them embellish themselves as much as they normally would. So lots of grey-brown cloaks, just normal cloaks straight off the factory line for the Skitarii, so they almost look like wastelanders or something, because they just don't have the materials to, paint them cells bright red like the Martians would. And then the Primaris coming in, like being massively scratched up. And maybe you could do them with grey shields, but it would also almost be too colourful. I kind of want them to be almost just like metal.
You could do the grey shields as like metal, but with like one shoulder pad in the colour of their Primarch.
That's a cool
like
idea. I could get like some transfers and stuff, and get, maybe one Pauldron could have like a space.
Well, if you get the box comes with Primaris transfers for Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves.
Oh, that's cool.
So
that's awesome.
Gives you a basis at least.
Yeah, and you could take those accent colours from those Space Marines. So the Dark Angels guy can have like a knee pad that's also has the number on of his kind of original squad or whatever. But they could otherwise be like grey or dark metal, and then they would also fit in with the Skitarii and look as though they were unified. Even though they come from these disparate parts. I like the idea of them having to work together, and in my head, the interesting relationships that would form for these people who don't really have orders, because they're not getting orders through the warp. They get like one thing will come in 10 years, and they'll have to interpret that however they can to try and stay alive, and, try and follow
That's a really
orders.
cool idea.
And it gives you loads of scope for fighting stuff, because stuff's coming out of the warp at them all the time. And so that it also lets me just pick models I want to paint selfishly. And, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come up with a name for the Forge World, a name for the system, and start thinking about like who the main characters are, and who who's actually in charge. It's probably not going to be the Primaris. I think they're going to be useful support, but I think it's probably going to be a Grand Tech Priest or some description.
That's rad. That's really cool.
How about you, Chris? Have you got any ideas?
So I have my demons for Tzeentch. That's a thing. I'm going to be working on them next anyway for AOS. So that's a army off the bat that I can try. And actually, there's a lot of things about the way the demon rules work in 40k that I really want them to find some. It's not going to happen because Tzeentch got a book in Age of Sigmar this year.
Yeah.
But I really prefer their interpretations because it's not just like, here's the same unit in a different system. It's the same model, but like in some cases reimagined a bit. So like the things I want to play with it basically because it sounds like it could be really fun and that might just be the direction I end up going in because, there are good rules for horrors splitting, which has been a nightmare to figure out how that should work in Age of Sigmar. It's kind of how I think they'll change summoning rules in Age of Sigmar in the next General's Handbook, but it just solves the problem of, because in Age of Sigmar, you have to pay the cost of a unit whenever you increase the max size of that unit, which means that splitting pink horrors, unless you house rules it, has like an exponential points cost, because they just keep the blue horrors that you create out of the pink horrors just keep getting bigger. And that means you pay for the full unit every time, which makes it completely impractical. Yeah. Whereas in 40k, you just pay once for the unit, and then the unit can increase up to its maximum size, but you've paid for the unit, which is sensible. But there's other things like, Screamers seem a lot better, and I love those models, and I love the kind of idea of them. Like, kind of like Tzeentch and Hell Manta Ray bats that, pour out of holes in the warp. The rules for Flamers are a lot cooler, generally. Flamers are strong in Age of Sigmar, but they're almost like an artillery unit. Yeah. Whereas in 40k, they're much more explicitly like a close range thing. They're like flamethrowers. They're like flying flamethrowers. So they have the pistol rule, which means they can fire into combat close range. Yeah. And in some cases they have two different versions of their own flame, but whether they're doing at close range or long range, so they can be a sort of a barrage, but then like do things at close range.
I'm guessing they hit automatically with those flame attacks as well.
So, which is really exciting. And, like, I think the Lord of Change is more exciting in Age of Sigmar, because Age of Sigmar has more interesting spells, generally. But, it seems like a kind of cool set of things. So that's an interesting idea. And also, you don't really need fluff for Tzeentch Demon Legions. They just come out of the warp. Aren't they? Yeah. I mean, they'd be a perfect foil for your Mechanicum, because if you're trapped in the warp all the time, that's going to happen. Yeah, like, Demon Incursions are going to happen. Yeah.
Daily menace.
And yeah, so they seem like it could be fun. And in any case, I'm working on those models anyway, so I might as well play with them a few times. One thing I would like to do is I would like to make a Codex compliant Space Marine force, because I like the idea of following a rule, like following a system. Yeah. However, because Guilliman is changing the Codex all the time, I'm going to wait before deciding on a chapter. I'm going to wait until the new Space Marine Codex is out to see what it says. Because it might be that there's a new founding chapter that I love the color scheme for, or the fiction hook, or whatever it is, and I decide to do something that's completely new to the setting. Or it might be that something changes substantially about the Codex Astartes, about how it's implemented for Primaris specifically. That means, so I'm going to wait and see. The top level idea at the moment is I'd like to do Imperial Fists, so the yellow guys, as, and probably their fifth company that has the black shoulder pad trims. Because that company was wiped out in the really bad straight-to-DVD Ultramarines movie. So the company's gone. So if it hasn't been refounded in the last 150 years, it makes sense that it would be one of the Primaris companies.
I watched that movie recently, by the way. Yeah. I rewatched it when I was in it doesn't hold up. I got a lot more out of it as, having come back into the lore. Like I gave it a pass for a lot of the things I didn't know at the time. We saw it in the cinema, didn't we? We went to the press showing of it. Sorry to interrupt.
No, but nonetheless, right. So the Imperial Fists in that they get really badly fucked up. They do. With their chapter, basically.
They do.
And cool. I had the idea of them almost being like Primaris, but because that particular Imperial Fists company is called the Heralds of Truth. And I really like the idea of that. And they have the sort of more religious kind of ritual object guarding role in the version they are in the bad movie. But I quite like the idea that almost mutates into like Heralds of Imperial Truth. And like you have like a sort of expeditionary Imperial Fists force of Primaris that don't necessarily adhere to the religious strictures of the Imperium that much, but are kind of but are a Codex compliant chapter, kind of learning that side of things. Yeah. But then I was thinking about mixing that in with possibly some like Sisters of Silence or something like that. So they have sort of both sides of the Imperium represented in one force, but we'll see. I might do something completely different because I just want to see what happens with that fiction rather than commit to it straight away. And then I still have the Night Household idea that I mentioned on the pod, the sea creature battling Pacific Rim Knight.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Which is a neat idea that I still might do. We'll get onto this probably pretty soon. We talk about what we've been up to, but I've painted, test units for Death Guard, and I loved painting them, and so that might steer me that way.
Yeah,
a bit. Like, I might stick with Chaos, but maybe do some Nurgly stuff because I'd like to see how they play. I think I'd be interested in seeing how they play, and I've got the units in the box, so I'll paint those up and see if I enjoy.
Got that blow drone as well.
Yeah, they're just such good models.
Fantastic.
So we'll see. I'm going to stay on the fence. I mean, I stayed on the fence while still buying the big box.
Right.
But I know that I ultimately will want everything in that. It's just exactly what I do with all the different parts of it.
I guess the Primaris are the hard part, aren't they? That's where,
So I've committed to a particular color scheme for the Nurgle, which is actually, cause I knew what I wanted to do, which is going to be closer to the Heresy color scheme of like white or bone.
Yeah.
So I've done that, but like a darker, dirtier bone color, because it's been 10,000 years and they don't take care of their gear. But there's actually a color scheme in the little Death Guard Codex that comes with the core set, and it shows you alternate versions that are called Corpse Makers, which is pretty much bang on what I wanted to do.
Oh, cool.
And it's neat because their whole thing is they see it as their duty to kind of eat away at and defile all of the edifices of the Imperium, almost like rot. And I had this idea of I like the idea of like a moth as a sigil of Nurgle, like the idea of like a moth in your cupboard, but like all your stuff decays, you know what I mean? There's sort of like, because there's a lot of insects with Nurgle.
Yeah.
I like the idea of sort of a moth as a sort of on a standard or something like that. This idea of like sort of like sense of decay. And also that kind of like color scheme that you associate with moths, like they're kind of like sickly white and sort of, and purples and greys and those kinds of colors, rather than the kind of traditional kind of bright green or gore or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the sense of sort of, like a kind of slow decay. Entropy setting in over time, things drying out and kind of going cold. And also then if I end up doing Imperial Fists, they are a naturally opposed force because Imperial Fists are the fortress builders and the people who throw up those edifices. So having those two forces so naturally philosophically opposed to each other would be kind of neat.
Oh, that's sweet.
So yeah, so what have you been up to this month, Tom?
Good question. I mean, I've finished up my unit of Space Wolves for Prospero, which we'll talk about the battle later. I've still got the big gold dues to do. But I feel like the hard part's over, to be honest. And I had fun painting them, but I'm glad that I don't have to paint any more of them ever.
Yeah. You played a couple of games this month.
I did actually. Not? Yeah, I played, me and my friend Chimp played, a game where we adapted the second skirmish scenario for a full size, for a 1,000 point battle.
That was the one we discussed last month with the treasure hunting mechanic.
Where there are certain points on the battlefield, and if you have people near them, you can roll a 6 each turn to see if it turns into see if they find treasure and it turns into a control point, basically. So we cut down the number of control points to 4 and had them in the compass points positions and had the center be a Garden of Moor, which is a piece of scenery, GW piece of scenery. And, I was running, with Stormcast, and Chimp was running with, his Flesh Eater Court, including a Morngul. And it's the first time I really fought one. And holy crap, that thing's amazing. It's so good. It's a Forge World model, and it's an enormous, like, probably 8-inch tall, ghost that's just a screaming head and 2 arms. And one of the arms is crushing a horse to death underneath it, and that's how it's kind of standing up. And he charged into the middle, and I tried to block it with Aether Wings, which are these tiny, beautiful birds that the Stormcast have. I just had some spare points, so I bought some Aether Wings to see if they could just block. They did not block anything. he just ate them, and every time he eats stuff, he gets wounds back. And every time he rolls 6s, he gets more attacks. And if those are 6s, then they do mortal wounds, and he absolutely wrecked everything. So all of my Stormcast ended up piling into this Morgul. It flew across the table. It can go through anything. It's ethereal. It has an invulnerable save, and Rend doesn't work against it. So you just all my Stormcast were just hitting it and hitting it and hitting it. My Relictor very slowly kind of ambled over and electrocuted it, and it was still going and still going. But on the other side, I have my new Vanguard Hunters, who are the kind of cloaked, warriors, rangers that Stormcast have, and they come on a different board edge and try to threaten that point to the opposite side of the board. And in the end, it came down to, I was losing the whole time because Jim managed to activate a point in his own, part of the board. And on the very last roll for the 5th turn, which is the end of the game, I managed to activate a different point that I happened to be standing on. And it was like one of my last 3 Stormcasts was just near it. And they rolled a 6 and so it lit up and it was a draw. So it was 1 point each. And I took down the Morngul as well. One of my archers shot it. Just an ordinary archer. Somehow shot a ghost to death. But it was really fun. And we used the new mat, that Games Workshop put out, which is kind of like a graveyard, battle mat. And we put down loads of, garden more terrain. So it was all properly theming and looked absolutely fantastic. It was a really great game and a really great piece of kind of, it's what AOS is so good at this, just creating loads of stories in the game. Even, you can argue back and forth about how competitive it is and stuff, but I'll always remember that Mongol just tearing through my dudes and then, my one, like, lib or someone who just found some treasure and managed to scrape a draw from the,
You're definitely getting a line in the single hero judicator that saves the day.
They are really good. And they always manage to, there's 2 things that always happen with my army. There's always one liberator surrounded by like loads of chaff that are about to eat him. That happens all the time. It happens all the time against Flesh Eater Court because they have, they're ghouls basically. So they've got loads of huge ghoul units. It was fun to use my rangers. I've not used them before. They're not very impactful, but they're very mobile and kind of interesting for objective grabbing. And those models are fantastic. That's been my main painting project this month. I've been painting those guys up. So I've done 5 of them up to kind of photography standard, pretty much. So I'm probably going to photograph those against a white background, send them into White Dwarf so you can get into the reader pages. Which is kind of my goal for the year is to get into the reader pages of White Dwarf.
I sent some stuff a while ago.
Yeah.
But they have like a 3-month lead time on the magazine, I now know.
Yes. So, yeah. I think it's
worth bearing in mind.
And also it's, knowing how, having worked on magazines and stuff, like knowing how they lay stuff out, there's every chance that a model won't get in if they just don't have the right size slot on the page and that stuff. But yeah, I think painting, having that as a goal is just enough to push me a bit extra to not cut corners and to do a better job. But that was really fun. I mean, I don't know if we could do painting phase separately or if we're just going to talk about painting.
We should go into what we've been painting now, I guess, because it's kind of like, cause I haven't actually played a game this month apart from one we'll talk about in a minute. So, but lots of painting. So what were the hunters like to paint? Because they're quite a lot more detail intense and material varied than regular Stormcast.
They were really fun to paint because of that, because it's, they're gold as well as other things. They've got fur on them. They've got like, I painted the kind of straps on their belts as like leather, like black leather, and put a lot more black on them than the Games Workshop actually. So, their capes, the inside of their capes is black with gold trim. So actually like it was tried to freehand some trim which came out okay, which is better than it's ever come out before when I tried to do that. So I see that as progress. They've got loads of like little gems on and stuff. And the big thing I've learned this month is that gloss washes are really, really great for metallics and for lots of different purposes. So the washes are always obviously like transparent shade, but these dry to a shiny effect, which is brilliant if you're going for a Stormcast type of gold, which is supposed to be this blazing, shining armor. But then you get to put loads of kind of warm depth into the color and shade the metallic without actually dulling the metallic down into a matte. So they look, like they're so reflective. It's crazy, like how bright they are when you look at them in real life, especially if it's, it's light coming in through a window, like they look really, really shiny. So with them and my long strikes, I think my gold painting has gone to a different level. And, now I just look back in sorrow at the rest of the Stormcast I painted last year. And like, why couldn't I should have done this for all of those hundreds of models. But it was still really good. Really had fun painting them. And what they kind of really rammed home for me was what I think I said this last month, where you can take a model out of any AOS army and it looks like a hero in and of itself, which is why skirmish works so well. Like if you take any one of those, Vanguard Hunter models and told me that it was a general of an army in the last edition, I would completely believe you.
Yeah. It's a good point.
It's as embellished and as kind of impactful and mighty looking, and the posing is great on them. It's if you've got an army full of models that are as good as hero models from the last edition, and that's a big cool thing to have happened to that range. So the ranges are not about rank and file anymore. They're about these big crazy concepts that each can stand on their own. And that's the big thing that AOS has done. It's not about pikemen anymore. It's about dwarves with top hats
and jetpacks.
and jetpacks on balloons. Yeah.
You've also done some Star Drake stuff, made some progress?
Yeah. So I've built the alternative head for the Star Drake, which is a slightly goofy kind of closed mouth version. So it's looking for a colour scheme really, and I've kind of come up blank really. So I was going for a kind of Calgar blue type thing, and I was going to do a 2-tone black scale and blue scale. But I'm completely torn about what to do with it. Like I did it, it looked fine. It looked competent enough, but it doesn't really fit what I think of Star Drakes as being like. They're supposed to be like iridescent, like glittering, pulsing with energy, which is obviously very hard to paint. But when I tried to do a more aggressive colour scheme on the other side of the head, it looked like a cartoon, basically. So I'm trying to find a colour scheme that is a little bit more unusual than just blue, but also has maybe a lot of different colours in it. So yeah, it's still a massive work in progress. And I want to be completely sure before I start, because that's a big model, and you got to commit.
Yeah, I can believe it. I'm thinking about doing something slightly weird at my load of change, but I'm going to test that first. Because if I'm wrong, then that's a big bird man.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've no idea what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll just post more pictures of random Star Drake. I'm going to just paint over that head over and over again. So it's going to end up as like this big ball of paint. All the detail will be gone, but hopefully I've been mad. Like I've been looking at pictures of geckos and stuff. Like lizards are incredibly colourful. Like, it's insanely colourful and like beautifully so. But I think if you tried to realistically put that, like go 1-to-1 from that onto a Star Drake, it would look silly, because the Star Drake is unusually that kind of scale armor doesn't really exist in nature as it does on dragons. So it's hard to find a comparable surface or material in nature. Yeah,
I found that reference pictures are useful to an extent, but they can't make decisions for you.
No,
really.
They just give me more ideas, which is annoying, because I just want to focus down on one thing and do it and make it look really good.
Yeah, I think this has been a very color selection-y month for me generally. Like I think it's a big part of what makes a model look good, actually, is the decisions you made about what colors you were going to paint them, which sounds dumb. That sounds like a dumb thing to say.
It's pretty true though.
But yeah, you're not wrong. Like, there's, I've actually got a lot more done this month than I thought I would. Right at the start of the month, I was sort of stalling on a bunch of different projects at once. The first thing I did was finish my 3 Harlequins for Shadow War.
Oh, yeah.
So we haven't actually played Shadow War yet.
No.
And ultimately, I probably will want more than 3 Harlequins, which is a scary concept given how hard they were.
Yeah,
but
that'd cause me.
I'm pleased with how they came out, and I think they, I mentioned that concept on the pod, like as a little aside, and it's nice that it's now done. The thing that was difficult about it was like coming up with an individual color scheme for each specific Harlequin that also had enough elements with the other Harlequins that they seemed like part of a unit. But it also was kind of a useful exercise in both coming up with these things, actually doing that, solving that problem, but also in trusting my instincts a little bit more. So I'd looked at loads of reference stuff like fashion and cyberpunk art and ideas that I had, 80s stuff, because I had this idea of like I wanted that Necromunda feel. And, but I also realized that like in addition to color, you've got to think about the kinds of contrasts you're creating and the kind of ranges you're establishing. And it feels like it's difficult and risky to vary the range or the extremes of the color sort of contrasts that you're creating. More so than it is to have completely different colors within the same unit, if that makes sense. So like, you almost need, like, I wanted to kind of, I wanted them all to pop in the same way, even if the contrasts that they're using to pop were completely different.
Right. So
the first one I did was super easy because I knew exactly what it was going to be from the start. I knew it was going to be red with a little bit of blue, black and white. Because, the thing I was really conscious to do was avoid literally Harley Quinn. Because you get into because you're in Harlequin colors, actually, like as in clown Harlequin, but specifically Batman Harlequin colors. And I was, don't know how successfully I avoided that, but on that particular Harlequin, I avoided lots of the kind of card symbol, stuff that you see on Harlequins, like the hearts and the diamonds. And they have other meanings in Eldar, but they're hearts and diamonds. And that, obviously communicates a specific thing. So she avoids some of that stuff. But I knew, because she's also based on a particular outfit worn by Grimes in a music video, that I wanted to kind of push it in that direction as well. So that changed some things about hair color and that kind of thing. And then I knew I wanted another one to kind of, because that one was all about kind of hard lines that have like a kind of sort of the 80s gradient, but as an outfit. You know, the kind of the 80s chrome thing where you have the kind of the mad kind of rainbow horizon over metal, that kind of thing. So one of them is a gradient from sort of dark turquoise through purple to orange, which is all kind of, again, it gets away from the kind of strict RGB of having a red-blue color separation, but that was like a whole thing by itself. But a fun gradient to paint, because no freehand on that, it's just one kind of mad shifting color. And then, because I had those two extremes established, it was the hardest thing to try and figure out the third one, because I had a sense of what I wanted to do, but I didn't actually think it would work as a miniature. And I ended up sort of breaking away from the spectrum of the other two and doing green and bone as contrasting colors, like a little bit more muted in some ways, but with more invested in freehand. So this was my kind of breaking into taking freehand checks and things seriously. I got some better brushes, which helped a lot, and did things in sort of careful sub-assemblies. And it took fucking ages. But I think the end result I'm really pleased with, but it was just a lot of very intensive work. And, you know, I think the actual execution was fine because they're not very big models, but like just a lot of like worrying and thinking and, you know, sort of not like, not knowing if something was going to be right until I'd done it. And the notion of painting more of them is honestly a little bit intimidating. So I'll be happy to play some games of Shadow War, but I'll probably find excuses to not expand the model count straight away. Might add a hero or something, but we'll see. But also, it definitely put to rest any idea of doing a
full-size army.
An army. The other reason is I can't, because I wanted to mount them on the Mechanicus bases, which I think is so important to the way they look.
Yeah.
It kind of establishes the kind of like city cyberpunk thing that I wanted to establish, was putting them on these scenery bases. But those scenery bases aren't made in Harlequin size. They're bigger, because Harlequins should be on a 25mm base.
Yeah, I've got the same problem with this Skitarii, actually.
And I figure for Shadow War, no one's going to care.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you and I won't care, because we can, you know, if something's close enough that the base size would have made a difference, we just go with what feels right. Like, but for an army over time, I think that will matter. You know, I'll stick these as an individual showpiece sort of thing. But the interesting thing is the flip side to that, and neither of these is the most time consuming thing I've done this month, but the other thing I did last week, was 2 test models from the Nurgle set mentioned earlier, which was the exact opposite experience from a painting point of view. And having also been working with Thousand Suns a lot this month, it was such a relief. Like, it was such a strange experience, because I decided with the Nurgle Marines, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but also I knew I wanted to try painting like how they tell you to paint in the books and stuff.
Yeah.
In a way that looks good on the tabletop and is relatively painless. Because I've now finished the Burning of Prospero 1,000 Suns. But the time consuming method for painting them came up with back in October. It's a 7-stage process to paint everything on those models that is red.
Yeah.
It took a fucking long time.
It took a while.
And I like the way it looks, but in hindsight, like, actually, no, I feel more compelled to do more with those models because they took so much time.
Yeah.
But with when we went to Warhammer World, I think we mentioned this last podcast, I was really struck by how different the GW kind of like, not the heavy metal style, but the art, like the studio painting style. Yeah. I think we both said this last month, right? Like, there were things about those models that you're like, I could do that. Like, it wasn't so far above my ability that like the best Golden Demon or the best heavy metal stuff is.
Yeah. It
was like, I can probably get to there within a year or two. But there were things about the way they were painted that were, the way I don't paint. Like, lots of use of washes to kind of get those, like, really entrench those lowlights even. And then specifically very fine, very high contrast line highlighting on edges. I think I got addicted to Lamy and medium while doing the Silver Tower stuff. And that resulted in everything being a blend all the time. I think maybe Zinch lends itself to that. Like, everything is a kind of swirling,
Yeah.
Everything's a swirling power sword or a swirling panel of armor, and the notion of just like, take your color, shade it, and then fine line highlight to make it pop. It was kind of alien. And so I took an afternoon and painted that one Plague Marine. and painted him completely the opposite to how I paint anything. I fully assembled the model, even though he's holding his gun against his chest. I sprayed him grey, and then I sprayed him with Xandri dust spray, which is a sort of sand colour. And then I base coated everything. So I painted all the metal, I painted all the tentacles, I painted all the cloth, I did everything, all the bone, base coated everything. Then I washed the shit out of it, first with Seraphim Sepia and then with non-loyal. And then I fixed some bits, and then I edge highlighted it, and then it was done. And I really like how it looks.
Yeah, it's great.
Because it looks like the ones from the books.
It does.
And I was like, oh, shit. Like, I can do this in like 6 fewer steps.
Right.
If I worry less, which is a kind of, I don't know if that's my tip for the month, is just like, try not freaking out as much about sub-assemblies.
Yeah.
Because while I was doing this, I'll maybe put a picture in the show notes, but like, I was so deep in my final tactical squad for Thousand Suns, which I painted the shoulder pads on the sprue, I mounted all the heads on little sticks and painted them separately, I did the legs and then built the torsos on the legs, base coated, and then did them. I painted all the guns separately and then attached the arms and then did all the backpacks in one big go, and I had like a day of painting backpacks, and that was great. Everyone loved that. And again, loved the result, but the whole process got fully into like, this is work.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not having, I have a stream, I have a stream on, but I'm not loving this process. I think it'd be a lot more fun to do it for an individual model, but but yeah, and then, I did a little Plague Walker, where I'm doing all my Nurgle flesh purple, which is a weird decision. Demonette hide is a really lovely color. It's like purple grey as a base coat. Goes on beautifully over a grey base coat. It's one of those like first pass you're done kind of things. I just wanted to see like, cause they got 20 of those guys and they're quite gribbly. They take washes very nicely, but it's like, what happens if you just base coat and wash them and then dry brush them in a few different colors and dry brush them in a few different colors. So from a kind of purple to purpley grey to bone, and it looks really nice. It's like, yep, quite simple, quite quick. I like purple for necrotic flesh because it's a little bit unusual. It contrasts very nicely with bone sand, like purple and like, because it's basically yellow and it's basically orange and blue, but color shifted in one direction. Just, kind of really gratifying process. And I had this sort of head on chin, like, I just had loads of fun doing these two. Maybe this is the direction I should go in.
This bodes well for your free time.
Not at all. I'm technically unemployed, Tom. This is bodes very poorly for everything. But yeah, so I don't know if that's necessarily an experience that you've had, Tom, because obviously Stormcast are quite a kind of a fun process, I imagine, generally. Gold is such a fun thing to paint. I find.
Gold is good. And also it's a little bit different to it's less punishing when you edge highlight gold than if you're doing colour. So if you're doing your kind of Space Marines and they're blue, and those edge highlights are much, much brighter. And if they're a bit rough, then they're going to look bad. Yeah. Whereas if you're highlighting gold with lighter gold and then silver, it's kind of fine. It doesn't really matter. Like, your eye doesn't really notice that, like, if it's not the cleanest line, it's not the cleanest edge highlight. So it's very forgiving. It's going to be interesting to paint some Primaris where they're all sharp lines.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have this sort of secret thing of like, am I committing to yellow? Because yellow is famously hard to do, and I'm going to hate myself. Like, but,
you gotta go with gotta go with the fantasy.
And if the fantasy is yellow and black
so be it.
B-men, then that is what it will be.
Yeah. So I wonder if starting to paint those Primaris will highlight any inadequacies in my edge highlighting. But it's a good way to practice.
I would recommend both with edge highlighting and freehand, good brushes make a difference.
Yeah.
Like my first 8 months of painting or so was basically exclusively with army painter brushes, which are super cheap, like £2 a go kind of thing. But they're not very, they're very light. They bend. They're not very springy. They're not very stiff. I don't know, because you don't want a stiff brush, but you want a brush that holds its shape.
Yeah. And
those brushes don't really, I find. They're fine for some things, but I know the ones I've still got, I treat as spare brushes and for basing and glooping, texture paint onto stuff and that kind of thing. I started using GW brushes, and Kalinsky Sable brushes, to give them a go, and the difference is very pronounced. I have some misgivings about Kalinsky Sable because it is real hair, it's animal hair, as I think all Sable brushes are. which is a thing to make your peace with. I'm trying it. I'm taking, my decision was I will give this a go and take very good care of those brushes, but I could totally understand it making people uncomfortable that they come from an animal that's been harvested for its fur. Apparently they're ethically sourced, but dunno. So it's a big question mark.
Yeah, interesting.
So it's something worth considering, because obviously artificial, synthetic brushes are also a thing. It's just that the synthetic brushes I've used are of pointedly lower quality. So don't know, but yeah, that made a big difference. And also it made a big difference with that edge highlighting. Like I found actually quite fun to do with a nice brush and sufficiently watered down paint. Yeah. Turns out Duncan was right.
He's always right.
He is always right. So yeah, that's, I guess my tip for the month would be don't worry so much.
Don't worry, have good brushes.
Yeah. Also I found that, you don't necessarily have to paint surfaces you'll never see. That's my other tip for the month.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I found myself, doing a second pass of shading on Space Marine shoulders that were about to get shoulder pads. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, literally we'll never see this unless something goes wrong.
Yeah.
You're making sure the super glue has less to adhere to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So,
when people pick up your models, don't turn them upside down and look up into the cracks.
Yeah. So, a future project, and again, this is dependent on timing, but I would like to enter Armies on Parade this year.
Oh, cool.
Which is, like a kind of store by store competition where you create like a 2-foot by 2-foot scenery board for your force and display them, and people go into the store and vote on their favorites.
Awesome.
I'd like to do that with my Thousand Sons because that then makes some additional use out of the time I've spent on them. Yeah. But also, given that I'm very unlikely to play Horus Heresy at all, that's the thing I can do. So I might, maybe expand it a little bit, but work on a board using the Burning of Prospero cardboard boards as a kind of inspiration. I build one, basically.
That'd be cool.
If I do that, I'll probably take a second pass at those models for some weathering and detail and to fix some of those mistakes. But learning that, like, for you and me playing a game that looks good and even photographs well, I just don't need to worry as much as I was about
every angle.
Every angle and trying to fix things. Particularly because I'm not, like, good enough that when I do that, it results in, like, a perfect model. It just results in me spending more time on it.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, there's certainly diminishing returns.
Yeah, for sure. So shall we talk about Prospero burning to the ground?
It just won't, I just can't put it out. It stopped,
drop,
and
fire.
Roll, Prospero.
It's been on fire for 10 months ever since we started painting these miniatures.
Indeed. So me finally finishing the Burning of Prospero set of Thousand Suns at long fucking last, meant that it was time to play another scenario in the box set. So our battle this month, comes from that set again. We spoke about it, I think, 2 months ago now.
Yep.
Really interesting little kind of bespoke skirmish system for fighting these kind of street by street conflicts that take place in the sort of the final hours of the battle for Prospero. So Magnus is missing. He's sulking somewhere. The surviving Thousand Sons, led by Ahriman, are defending the last city left on Prospero that was protected from the Space Wolf orbital bombardment by massive Kine shields. So basically a big psychic shield. There's a good thing in the Inferno book that establishes that because the Thousand Sons did nothing as the Space Wolves arrived, they were completely passive. They didn't even show up in the battle for the first 10 hours of the fighting or something. There's sort of this sense of like, but are they really all that bad? But any doubt was put aside by the fact that the one city that survived under this giant magic shield. Like, do you think they're really in breach of this prohibition against? Oh, yeah, they are. Yeah, there it is. And so this scenario that we chose to play, is a really interesting one. So this is, the first scenario was about Thousand Sons trying to hold the line as the Space Wolves break into the city of Tisca, which of course you did with Guigor.
Didn't go home, fail and then leave.
Guigor running merrily to continue butchering civilians.
That's what he loves to do.
Because they're all assholes.
He's definitely the good guy.
Yeah. This scenario flips that a little bit, and it has Ahriman and a unit of a cabal of Terminators hunting the Sisters of Silence in the ruins of the city. Sisters of Silence being sort of psychic gnolls that are completely resistant to psychic power and very good at killing psychers. So the Thousand Sons are trying to kind of like get out ahead of them. And the flavor text begins with like Gygor licking blood off his knife so that he can remember what real things taste like because there's too much magic.
Yeah.
And rather than just having a polo mint or something, it's like, nope.
It's the Space Wolf equivalent.
Yeah.
Breath mint.
I'm just eating my knife. What, like, yeah. Like a dog with a chew toy.
Yeah, he's literally smelling the kind of, the smell of whatever the after effect of magic going off is, which I imagine must be an odd scent. And it so offends him so much. It makes him so angry that he just licks his sword and charges headfirst into the nearest batch of enemies.
Yeah. And therefore vanishes from the battle.
Yes, he just
so
runs
not in this one.
It's like he ran straight through the enemy in the first scenario, and in my mind he's just kept on running, and he's just faster than ever. He's just outstripped.
He's the Forrest Gump.
He is. He's just going with his lightning claw.
Run, Gygor, run!
There he is.
Stab, stab, stab.
So he's not in this scenario. So he was just off the board somewhere, having a nice time.
There's also a much bigger board than the previous scenario, which is really nice to see, and the board's really nice. So you had a full squad of Sisters of Silence and a full squad of Tactical Marines. So you had 15 models to my 6, because I had 5 Terminators and Ahriman. So 5 tough dudes. However, I did additional support in the form of an off-screen Titan. Yeah. Which is an amazing mechanic. Really cool. So basically, above one of the Great Pyramids of Tizca, there's a decommissioned Titan, which is a sort of 3 skyscraper tall, gigantic Mechanicum war machine that is crewless and decommissioned, but Ahriman is controlling it using the warp, which is kind of an amazing thing. Like, he switched it on. And what this let me do is at the beginning of every turn, I could place a targeting reticle on one square of the board, and then we'd roll off on D6, and whoever won, if I won the roll off, then the reticle stayed where it was. If you won, you got to move it to an adjacent square, and if we drew, then the Titan decided to shoot something off the board, and the reticle was just removed. And then at the end of the turn, so after movement, everything else, if anything was still on that square, they died instantly as they were shot by a volcano cannon.
Yes.
Which nothing died, but it feels like, because you get to move after the tactical reticle clears, nothing really will, unless something mad happens.
Well, I think the best way to use it is to use it in combat. So you put it on a unit you're planning to pin in combat, and if you get the priority, you go up to them, and they can't move away.
Yeah, I think whenever I pinned you in combat, people died. So but I think the reason it's there is because of the way the victory conditions work. Is essentially it creates a no-go zone, like a roaming no-go zone every turn.
Yeah.
And so the way the victory conditions work is if I kill all 5 Sisters of Silence, I win. If any of your Sisters of Silence can survive 8 turns, or until all of the Terminators are dead, not Ahriman, then you win. And what was really interesting about the setup is there were 3 big boards and 2 small boards with like bridges on them, basically. And 2 of the big boards were connected to each other, and the third one was connected to the others via a bridge. And you had to set up all your models first, kind of scattered evenly across the big boards. And then I could set up my units anywhere I wanted on the 2 bridges, which meant I had the choice of creating one big force on one bridge, or splitting my army. But because you deployed first, we should start with why you deployed, how you deployed, and why you deployed like you did.
Yeah, so you had to deploy one person per square, which is unusual, because the cool thing about the game is that people can move into, you can have 4 people to a square, and you've kind of formed these impromptu squads as you're playing. So having them all in separate places was an interesting, it's basically, I just wanted to spread the objectives around. So the sisters, a couple of them were on one big board. One of them was on another, and another one was on another. Just kind of like space them out, but also make sure they were screened, make sure they were Space Marines, just normal Space Marines, in the way of any charges potentially. And just kept it neutral, really. Just kept it, basically made you make the decision about what you're going to attack, and spread the risk across the 3 boards, basically.
Yeah. I had the sense that if you geared one board, particularly the board that's isolated towards like close combat or ranged, I would counter it or one of the other boards there, and that would be the circumstance in which I would split my forces. But because you evenly distributed yourself, I didn't want to risk splitting my Terminators. I think it's interesting, like how obviously like old dice games, it can be swingy. But what I didn't want was to lose the initiative and just lose those units before they could do anything, or like lose half of them and then have an understrength unit getting beaten up by everything as everything else struggles to catch up.
Yeah.
So I then chose to deploy everything on the bridge that wasn't surrounded. The other thing I could have done is placed everything on the bridge that was surrounded.
Yeah, that would have been a very different game.
And
really interesting.
Yeah. But I chose basically to place all of my stuff in a sort of spearhead at one end of the corridor of streets and just work through you, basically. That was the plan. So, there's a few interesting kind of little mechanics off the start. So, Ahriman's presence on the board means that whenever we roll off for initiative, you roll a d6, but I roll a d8 because he can see the future. So he's
Pretty
good
useful.
Yeah. Well, technically.
Yeah, to an extent.
To an extent. And also when doing, warp checks, also when I'm trying to cast spells, to remind people this works by, I declare what I'm going to try and cast, and then we take it in turns, me going first to draw a card from this deck of 18, I have 18 warp cards, you have 18 willpower cards. And so I might get something simple, like I draw a 2, and you draw a 1. And after we've each drawn 3, we sum up how many points we've got. And if I win, I cast a spell. If you win or draw, then I don't cast a spell. However, different cards have different special rules, and some of them interact with different ways. A really simple example is one of them is worth more if the Sisters of Silence are on the board, which of course they were for this scenario.
Yeah.
For me, one of them is worth more if Ahriman is there. So, there's different things that can happen. We can get into exactly what can happen and how unlikely that might be, later on. But, the other thing Ahriman does is you draw an extra card whenever you're casting with him. So you have a greater chance of getting those spells off. So first turn, I won initiative, off my D8 roll. So I kind of had seen the spells that I had for this particular scenario, and I knew what I wanted to do, and I really loved the way this ended up looking. So I had a spell called Shroud, which allowed me to create like a mist on a tile. And which acted as a piece of cover for blocking line of sight for shooting through, but you could stand in it and shoot out of it. So Ahriman's Cabal successfully, created a, shroud of mist in front of him, and then sort of marched forward Ahriman and the Terminator Captain into that, so that they could shoot at your tactical squad that was positioned ahead of them, but not get shot back, and the guys behind them would be protected. I have 2 Lightning Claw Terminators that kind of charged up one other side. Obviously, they can't do anything yet because they're not in range. My other units moved up. And then I got to use one of my other cool powers where, the description of it's great, but it's basically the Thousand Suns just start telekinetically hurling pieces of their destroyed city at people. And that did 1 point of damage to a lone Space Wolf Tactical Marine who will be very important for the next 3 turns.
Positioned at a choke point, where when you put down the boards, you also put down scenery, according to the map for the scenario. And these block line of sight and obviously block movement as well. So it creates some quite obvious choke points where, I wanted to just kind of stuff them full of chaff Space Marines to try and slow down the, relentless onslaught of these huge lightning clawed Terminators. And this one guy, he held the fort basically. He stood his ground on the entrance to that little choke point.
What was amazing was he survived getting rocks thrown at him. He then got successful armor saves for every shot that was then shot at him.
Yeah.
Including, I think, one where I think it was his turn. I took a photo of it because I rolled a D10 and a D8, and you rolled 2 D6s for your defense roll.
Yeah.
And I rolled a 1 and a 2, and you rolled a 1 and a 2.
Yeah.
And so
he was both fine.
Yeah, he was fine. But your tactical Marines retreating managed to shoot and kill one of the Lightning Claw Terminators just right off the bat.
Yeah. Which is quite a big deal.
So that obviously really hurt them. So what I thought was going to be my charge, magic, shoot, block line of sight. Because I had this idea that because the game ends immediately if I lose all my Terminators, I have a Terminator with the Reaper autocannon, the huge gun. So I'm going to keep him at the back because you're less likely to shoot him.
Yeah.
And as long as he's alive, as long as him and Ahriman are alive, I've probably still got a chance.
Yeah.
So I was using the Shroud to shield them, knowing that you'd probably end up shooting the Lightning Claw Terminators, but I just didn't think I would take a casualty. But So it happened.
Yeah. It's quite, 'cause they've only got 2 wounds, and if they happen to roll badly once, that's it. It's an interesting kind of combat system because everyone regenerates their wounds every turn, so everyone has like a set amount of toughness at the beginning of each phase. But if you can focus enough fire on even the most powerful stuff, you can take it down with relative ease quite quickly. So yeah, that was fortunate, but exactly what I needed to happen because those lightning claw guys are terrifying. If they get attacks in and they kill people, they can keep charging into people, can't they?
Yeah.
They've got get their momentum up.
Yeah, which didn't occur much, but it did kick in.
Yeah.
And so that was like, it was not the lethal first turn I was hoping for. Like I had the first sense then, like, oh, this wasn't quite enough damage. Like I lost a Terminator and did nothing to you in return, which is obviously a really bad trade.
It was really cool to fall back as the Space Marines. So that, like, basically the way movement works and the way you can just form impromptu squads as people move in and out of squares with each other, it creates this really cool kind of ordered sense of retreat where I was just kind of forming up in like a tactical defensive position next to this bridge that was like incredibly themey for how Space Marines would fight. Not necessarily how Space Wolves would fight in all their kind of rage and viciousness, but it felt like I was, following the Codex Astartes to the letter, retreating, covering, choke points, holding the objective back, keeping the sisters protected.
Yeah, and so, even then, your sisters, now that you knew where I was, were already retreating into the back square, basically, like the back tile, like getting across that bridge.
Yeah, they're going across the bridge into this kind of weird, like an altar, like a kind of weird, it's had scarab.
There's scarabs everywhere, man.
Scarabs.
It's where we keep our scarabs.
It's the scarab room.
Yeah.
Which wasn't suspicious at all. No chaos here or whatsoever, but, this room's full of scarabs. So they were hiding in there.
Yeah. So the, next turn, I think, was probably that lone Marine that survived that first. So he got a big rock dropped on him. And then he survived the rest of that turn. And then I think this turn was the one where he really started to shine because, I had a spell that allows me to force one of your units to attack one of your other units, but failed to cast it because I think you got the right number of nullifying rolls.
Yeah.
So obviously the magic can really start when it goes wrong. It really doesn't happen. I did have the nice thing of my guy with the autocannon using his own psychic powers to give himself a kind of like precognitive shot where he has a vision and just fires in the psychic phase, with his, D10 attack, autocannon, which again, that lone Marine managed to save.
Yep, he's fine.
He was fine. And then I tried to drop rocks on him again, and then that failed. So I only got one spell off in the second turn, and it didn't do anything. So that was like a no-go. However, Ahriman and the Terminator captain were able to charge into melee. The Lightning Claw guy moved up, and the other Terminator started to move up and around, basically to kind of get in as your guys continued to fall back. I did do the Titan shot was a thing again, but I think I won the roll for it to stay where it was, but again, you were able to move away from it. It just created a zone where you couldn't go.
Yeah, sure.
So the, this was the turn where, so I shot at that lone Space Marine with everything, and he saved everything. And then Ahriman attacked him with his D12 melee weapon, Terminator Captain attacked him with his D8 power sword, and he saved both of them.
He was fine, yes.
Yeah.
Everything's okay.
Your squad did, however, roll like double snake eyes back at Ahriman. So basically, no one could get through anyone else's armor.
They were really freaked out, I think, at that point, because they just watched Ahriman. The Terminators are terrifying. They're such awesome models. The Tartarus pattern, 30k Terminators. There's a description of, in the fluff introduction to the scenario where, Guigor looks into its eyes for a moment and just can't move because it's such this terrifying maelstrom.
Yeah, also you're just seeing the warp, basically.
Looking back at him. So I imagine they were a little bit off-put by that.
One thing that was interesting that happened in that turn as well is I drew a warp card that allowed me, in I think one of the failed attempts, that allowed me to not gain the points value of that card, but instead discard one of the magic cards I had to draw another one at random.
Oh, yeah.
And that gave me a spell that would be important later, because what I was looking for was another damage spell. So the spell I got rid of would allow me to swap the positions of any of my units, which would have been potentially useful, but because we were fighting in a straight line, I didn't see it as being as useful as it might have been had, for example, I set up in 2 separate places.
That would have been very different.
Yeah.
It was interesting using choke points because Terminators are so big, they can only be 2 to a square. So you can only ever bring to bear in close combat the force of 2 Terminators, which is obviously very powerful, but it's a different kind of proposition to having a squad of 4 kind of plowing through people.
So, yeah, so that, even though it sounds like an eventful beginning, it's kind of actually pointed that it was quite so non-lethal, because I had the sense that, like, you had the 10 Marines and the rapidly retreating sisters, and I just wasn't making progress through them. Like, I had spent 2 turns marching and casting spells, and the spells were failing, and there's this sense that, like, that disciplined retreat that you were orchestrating had completely blunted what needed to be a kind of rampage.
Yeah, kind of shock and awe.
Yeah.
Crash in and get to the sisters.
Yeah, like, you know, Ahriman's here now, and things are going to happen. So there's a sort of like I had that sense of a ticking turn clock. We have 8 turns to do this. We've done 2 of them, and you haven't lost anybody, and I've lost a whole Terminator. So it sort of felt very uncertain. And so at the beginning of turn 3, again, put the Titan marker down. I think on that turn you managed to move it out the way, or maybe it was the next turn.
I think I ended up winning most of the rolls for the Titan shots. I think it went on down on the center, and I chose to leave it where it was because it was,
it was on turn 3 that you got initiative, which you would then get every turn until the final one.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But the bigger swingy thing in this was, so I used my new attack in the motion phase, which is called bioelectric.
Oh yeah,
lightning, basically force lightning. Ahriman electrocutes people, which does 1 attack to the first unit it hits, but then it does potentially loads to the unit next to it. And this is a great moment because, as will become a theme, so Ahriman, obviously pissed off by how poorly this spearhead assault is going, just taps into the warp and let's go with this kind of outflow of warp power. Because the first card I drew was called Warp Flood, and there's only 1 of these in the deck. And what it means is the power I'm casting is automatically cast. You don't draw any more cards. It has happened, but the psychic phase ends right there. I don't cast any more spells. So drawing it as the first card on the first spell is actually quite bad for me, because there's a good chance I'm going to succeed in that casting attempt with Ahriman anyway.
Yeah, sure.
And now I don't get my other 2 spells. So, but nonetheless, so this surge of warp lightning leaps from Ahriman into that lone Marine who's survived everything. And surprise, surprise, it bounces off him completely. Nothing happens. However, it then chains onto the unit behind him and kills one of them.
Jim, no!
Exactly. So fucking invulnerable Stuart, the best Space Wolf, aces another, save, but his mate behind him doesn't.
He's Ash now.
But that was my only spell for that turn, whereas hypothetically I could be killing multiple Marines if I hadn't drawn that warp flood. So you got initiative, which gave you a chance to fall back, because you can fall back out of being pinned if you win the initiative roll.
Yeah.
I think you won it like 3-2 or something ridiculous like that as well.
It was close.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of consolidated now into like 2 squads of Marines, I think.
Yeah, so I decided to put a bunch of them into a squad of 4 at almost the back of the board, like overlooking the sightline of where the Terminators are going to be coming up. Just with a heavy bolter in there and a Vexillor, who's a banner carrier, basically gives people rerolls, and a couple of normal squaddies. So they were going to hopefully lay down enough fire to maybe take out another Terminator if I rolled well. And then in front of them there was the indomitable, invincible lone Marine and 1 other guy on separate squares. So it was very much kind of using stragglers to block the advance of the Terminators while laying down fire from the back with a big unit.
I think he did move the lone Marine into this space vacated by his recently incinerated pal.
Yeah, I think so. There were 2 of them there.
Yeah,
so they could actually roll 2d6 back in combat. So they were the kind of the screen. They were at the thin end of the wedge. That's where you don't want to be.
Because you retreated, though, that gave me a chance to fully move up. So Ahriman just chased after him, basically. Although I rejigged the units a bit. Ahriman had been with the Terminator captain, but I moved him to being with the Lightning Claw guy, because Ahriman is far better in close combat than he is at range. And so I wanted to have one really powerful close combat squad, basically. Yeah. So I just, swapped Ahriman in for the Terminator that had died and moved, created a new unit with my kind of bolter and grenade harness Terminator with the Terminator Sergeant. That combat phase went brilliantly for me. Suddenly, I've been rolling quite badly at the start, and you'd been getting obviously amazing armor saves, and it just flipped round. Like, my armor saves were on fire. Like, Ahriman just waded into this sea of bolters that were all trained at him and saved everything. Which is, it felt kind of right. You know what I mean? This sort of, one of the most powerful psychers in the universe, just sort of walking into fire and it just doesn't touch him. And because of the rule about, if you have dual wielding a weapon, you can make an attack after all your other attacks are done. And that extra attack finally managed to kill Indestructible Stuart.
He died. But he died a hero.
He did, yeah. He held me up for, I killed him on the third turn, having wounded him on the first. Yes. Which is a lot for a 2-wound Space Marine.
He did very, very well. If anyone deserved to be interred in a dreadnought, it would be him. Yeah. But he's dead. He's gone. Like, he was trodden on by a giant,
I think Ahriman cut him in half. No, hang on, the Terminator just gored him with,
just stabbed him in the eye.
So, that was a shame for him. But that meant that I'd made up quite a bit of ground. And by this point was actually, I killed 3 Marines. So, I was getting through, I hadn't lost anything. So, I was starting to pick up some momentum and bring guns to bear and that kind of thing. Going into the fourth turn, however, I very carefully picked my spells because some of the spells are really good against a big clustered group of units. Some of them are good against, so for example, because the Warp's lightning spell does more damage when it bounces, what I wanted to do was soften up one of your units and then lightning the one next to it so that they take the big hit again and so try and spread some wounds around, because you have to do all those wounds in one turn because the Marines are getting the health back. However, on my first spell, which was the telekinetic bombardment, throwing chunks of Tizca at people, I drew Warp Flood again. Yeah. So that 1 in 18 happened again. I was shuffling the deck between each time, but drew Warp Flood again. So Ahriman at this point just has more fucking warp than he can handle. The fact that Sisters of Silence there doesn't appear to matter, because Ahriman literally can't hold all this warp. Yeah. It's just, it's flooding out of him, but it is nonetheless, happening. So I did manage to drop some rocks on you. At which point, though, you got the initiative because of an interesting rule, which is that in the event of an initiative roll tie, the loyalists, i.e. the Space Wolves, always get it. Because they are the attackers, technically. They are, they're the invaders of the planet. So your group kind of continued to fall back, but you did bring your other Marines, the Marines that have been sort of bodyguards for the Sisters just in case, started to come up at this point, I think, as well.
Yeah, they started to move onto the bridge, and first of all, it was useful to have those extra bolters trained on the attackers, but also it was just a way of putting a Marine in every square and kind of trying to force, just by weight of bodies, stop the Terminators from getting across the bridge and hopefully just waiting out the 8 turns for the victory. So I knew I wasn't really going to kill anything, because the good thing about having a sightline corridor is that you can put loads of fire into it. But if, the bad thing is that you can't shoot, you have to shoot the nearest thing, and enemies count as cover, so you can't shoot enemies behind. So Ahriman was doing an amazing job of just tanking it, and he's got 4 wounds, I believe. Yeah. So you have to do quite a lot of damage to actually take him out, and if you choose to, you could let the Terminator die before Ahriman even dies.
Yeah, I was using Ahriman to tank for the Terminator, weirdly, because I didn't want to keep allocating, because the second I get a second wound, you can't split the wounds. No. I was allocating through Ahriman, gambling on the fact that you wouldn't get through all 4 in a single turn, which you didn't. I was pouring a lot of fire in, but Terminators have D8. Terminators have D10, Ahriman has D8.
So it's really good at resisting damage. So the way the system works is when you roll a dice, and then your opponent rolls a dice, and you match each attack to each defense roll, and the type of dice you roll affects the odds. So I'm only rolling D6s with my bolters, but Chris can roll a 10 with a Terminator roll. So that's why it makes them very hard to take down. So at this point, I'd lost so many Marines, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to pour enough fire into that spearheading unit to really kill anything for the rest of the game. So it was total Project Lockdown after that, just kind of making sure that it took you ages to get across the bridge.
Yeah, every Marine gives him his life to buy more time.
Absolutely.
For the Sisters of Silence, which is a really nice thematic thing. And there is this sort of...
Yeah.
It was nice as well that this was Space Wolves on the defensive. Like, Thousand Suns are still a Space Marine Legion. They can still fight and kill people.
Yeah,
right?
it's very, very well.
Like, so in my combat phase, Ahriman and the Lightning Claw Terminator that he was with managed to kill one of the sisters that hadn't got across the bridge in melee. So they killed her before she could do anything. My autocannon killed a guy. And I used my grenade harness, which is like a one-off attack, which,
I did really well.
It's like a grenade launcher mounted on the back of the Terminator that I can use once per game to do like basically an attack with a number of shots equal to the amount of models in a square. So because you had consolidated your position into one big blob of guys, it was the perfect time to just nuke them, basically.
Yeah.
And I think I killed 3 Marines and a sister that turn. That was definitely the bloodiest turn.
Interesting risk reward to consolidating into squads, because I get my rerolls for doing it, but obviously they're vulnerable to lightning attacks and to grenade attacks, and there are a lot of ways that you can be punished for it, which is quite cool. It's that really, you have to make that decision quite carefully.
Yeah, it felt like a really cool moment as well, because it's sort of like, that was the moment the line broke, but the question then was like, this was obviously turn 4, halfway through the game. I'd covered more than half the board, but had I killed enough people to, actually get where I needed to go and kill the sisters, which is the big thing. So, turn 5 was the turn where the Titan didn't shoot because we drew on the roll off. So it just decides to shoot something else somewhere else. I did manage to cast a spell to trick your sergeant into firing a plasma pistol at the one surviving Space Marine from the other unit, but he missed. So no, you saved it. So
pinged off him.
Yep. And then I did manage to do the precognitive shot again from the autocannon. However, that turn drew one of your cards that also, like Warp Flood, ends the phase. So I got to do the spell, but it had to be the last spell of the turn. So I got 2 spells that turn, but neither of them did anything. So and also so magic wasn't a huge factor. I think you also won the initiative on a tied roll of 2. So none of us feeling it, but Space Wolves might as well go first.
Just about ahead.
And so apart from the one Marine that survived the previous turn, you were kind of safely on the bridge, and I had to just spend a turn moving up, I guess. Like, there wasn't lots to be said for it. However, this was the turn that we realized that we had been forgetting a super important rule for the entire game.
Really?
So one of the reasons that having a weapon with a value of D8, D10, D12 is a big deal, apart from being statistically likely to beat an armor roll of D6, is that any result of 6 or higher does double damage. There's a critical hit. We had completely forgotten this. So every time Ahriman rolls an 8 or something, he should be doing 2 damage, which should kill 1 Marine in one go.
Yeah.
However, what we realized was that this would have changed the game so far, so much. Like, that Marine from, may well have died much earlier. A lot of my spells would have done more damage, but also I probably would have lost more Terminators. I probably wouldn't have been able to risk assigning wounds to Ahriman, just have him soak them up, because if he takes 2 crits, he's dead.
Yeah.
So there were so many things that could have gone, I think, in both of our favor, that we decided that we were going to keep playing as we had been playing for the rest of the game. Particularly because I realized this in a moment where Ahriman could have killed someone in one hit, but didn't. Because the reason for getting that roll is bad is there are times where, like, if it's going to be the last shot of a turn and none of your targets have been wounded, there's actually no point taking the shot if you don't have crits.
Yeah.
Because even if it's like a D6 shot, if you've got a regular bolt gun and you're shooting at someone with 2 wounds, without crits, you can't kill them. It doesn't matter. You just can't kill them because they're going to regen that wound anyway. However, you can kill them on a roll of a 6 if you have crits. So we should definitely not forget that in the future.
Yeah. It makes rerolls more powerful as well. So stacking that squad of 4 with rerolls more chance to get those 6s, more chance to just one-shot Terminators. So yeah, it's a different game. In fact, I'd have played it completely differently anyway, because I wouldn't have tried to survive 8 turns in that scenario. I'd have actually used the sisters to try and do damage.
I didn't feel this way about the first scenario, but this one I want to replay, partly because I think strategically there are other things we could do, but also, that would have made such a huge difference. But we decided, having forgotten it, that we were going to play as it was. Otherwise, not like a massively eventful turn. I moved forward. I killed the last of the Marines on this side of the bridge, but wasn't able to shift anything else. Start of turn 6, Ahriman goes to perform his warp lightning on the surviving Marines again, and guess what happens? It's another first card warp flood.
There's so much warp.
I know. He doesn't know what to do with it. It's just coming out of the fucking walls. It's coming out of his eyes. It's coming out of his hands. So yeah, we after the game we figured out what the odds of this are, because it's a 1 in 18 turns every time that happens, and by this point it had happened 4 turns in a row.
Yeah, I think statistically it's likely to happen over the course of a magic phase, because you're casting 3 things and drawing 4 cards a turn.
So it should happen. Yeah, so I suppose,
but it's happened so early in each of your turns.
So it should happen eventually, because if you cast 3 spells. With the normal amount of cards, you draw 9 cards. So you'll hit it eventually.
And then Ahriman's drawing extra cards.
He just 1 extra.
All
so
right.
it tilts it like 50%.
So then I'm drawing cards as well. And I draw 3 each turn, and I've got 1.
Yes. So you're right. It should happen just over half the time, but it should happen just over half the time at all. But then it's at what point you draw that card is the crucial bit.
Yeah.
So drawing on the first spell is always the worst thing to happen, because it shuts down the potential for anything else to happen.
I think it's highly likely that the phase will be ended by one thing or the other, because as you're drawing each card, you're putting it to one side. So you're going to get through your whole, almost most of your deck each magic phase.
Well, you'll get through, tops half of it. But, so you'll either draw at maximum 9 or 10 cards.
Of 18.
Unless you do that thing, because one of your cards is you can choose a more potent dispel at the cost of giving me an extra spellcast at the end of the turn.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I suppose in the absolute, if Ahriman casts every single spell, I could potentially draw 16 cards in a turn. So I'm almost guaranteed to hit it, but that is a very edge case kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the odds are, it's unlucky to draw it so early every single turn though. Like it's the first spell of each, like for 3 of those phases.
Yeah. 3 of the 4, it was in the first spell.
Yeah, so
Twice it was
really
the first card. So it was like, it was that sort of, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is happening. That lightning didn't do anything, I don't think.
I think it.
No, but this was the turn where Ahriman and Terminators got across the final bridge.
They did.
And killed every remaining Space Marine.
Yep. What time was this now? Turn 6, was it?
Turn 6.
Right. 2 turns.
So you had 2 turns of hiding the sisters behind big scarab beetles.
Yep. I'm not ashamed to do.
And so I was trying to flush you out using the Titan, but actually you won every roll for the Titan after that point.
Yeah, and also they could just move out of the way.
And also they can just move out of the way. But like, I wanted you to move into line of sight, or
enough.
around corners and things.
But you had pretty good line of sight in the end.
Yeah, that was one thing we figured out, because the line of sight rule is you need to be able to draw a line from any point of the square you're in to any point of the square they're in, which actually makes it a lot more open than it seems. I think it's actually probably the way it needs to be when you don't have 3D terrain.
Yeah.
So you don't have the benefit of leaning down to a model's eye view to figure it out. You have to kind of...
There's got to be a bit of an abstraction there.
Yeah. And also I think if it wasn't that, then, simply being behind a box would be a bit broken, particularly because you can put 4 models in that square and they're all equally hidden. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, so that seemed to work pretty well. The start of turn 7, I did Bioelectric Lightning, and you drew the card that means that it's the last spellcast of the turn. And then I failed. So no magic happened that turn.
No. The Sisters of Silence,
which was a big, we both looked at it at that moment and went, that was a big deal. Because that was one of my ways of getting the damage in, like killing one. Like,
the interesting thing about Sisters is because they are these psychic nulls. They can't be targeted by certain spells at all. And, when they're defending against spells, they're drawing extra cards as well. So again, increasing that likelihood of having that, drawing that turn ending, cards that has helped me out so much for this game.
Yeah. So your sisters are also equipped entirely for melee combat.
Yes.
So this was a very sort of, obviously a one-sided turn in terms of rolling dice, because it was just my Terminators marching forward and shooting. but you saved everything. So, there were no casualties at all that turn, which,
No.
given that I only had 2 turns left, that meant that I had 4 sisters to kill on
Yeah.
the final turn of the game.
Yeah.
Which, and that was an interesting thing to figure out, because I was looking at it, and mathematically, it was mathematically possible if we were using the crit rule,
Sure.
because then I could one-shot some of them, hypothetically, on
Yeah.
a good enough roll. It was impossible without it. So that was where not having that rule had probably its most pointed effect.
Yeah.
But I still think we did the right thing to not bring it in halfway through the game. Nice moment though was this time I did manage to cast telekinetic bombardment by Ahriman, and I did pull Warp Flood on the first cast again. So
That's very true.
Yeah, it happened on 7 out of 8 turns in the end.
Which is insane.
Apart from the turn, it happened on things that stop the spellcasting phase early, happened on 7 out of 8 turns. They happened in the first turn, first spellcast 6 times, and 5 times I think that was me drawing Warp Flood, which is
Hilarious.
like, just Ahriman again overflowing with it. It's almost like something's bad going to happen to him in the warp very soon.
Who knows?
Or sometimes Ahriman casting spells is a bad idea. Who knew? But in this game, it was successful. Did manage to pull a big chunk of Prospero out of the ground, throw it at the Sister of Silence, and you did fail both your armor saves, and she did die, and that was quite gratifying. Like, you're immune to magic powers, you're not immune to like me just picking up an obelisk with my mind and dropping it on you.
No, that'll still definitely work.
Yeah. Charged into combat. Ahriman didn't care about being hit by sisters, really.
No.
Ahriman cut her sister in half.
And then you ran out of time.
And then we ran out of time.
Then I don't know what happened. So I suppose like some Space Wolf drop pods land outside, and suddenly, you have to retreat as forces come sweeping back.
Again, like, despite
kill
being
sisters.
another loss, it feels like sort of bloody losses feel like a good, and this is not an excuse, a good kind of plot outcome for Thousand Suns Battles of Prospero. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like, I'm not kicking your ass every game. It's
No,
like,
that's not how that.
but it's not an
whole thing
easy,
went.
but it's not like an easy fight for you either. It's
No.
like,
Those Terminators are amazing. They're really, really good.
yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to kind of, the scenario teaches you what each unit is capable of. So the first one was obviously like basic units. Now we've seen the Terminators. At some point we're going to see the Custodes, which are the big gold, Emperor's personal bodyguard, fighting alongside the Space Wolves.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see how all those units interact when they're all on the board eventually.
Yeah, because the last scenario is both players field everything.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And also, actually, something about this game that's impressed me is, obviously, absurd 8-month hobby project notwithstanding. I mean, obviously it took us long because we both got kind of distracted by other things.
Yeah.
You'd think it's a 6-scenario game, but actually it feels quite substantial. Like, we'll probably, each one takes us about an hour, I think. So, we'll get 6 hours at least of game out of this. And it's very nicely presented. I don't think these boxes, either this or Betrayal at Calth, make for very good entry points, because it is the most, and the fiction's good, but obviously the models are they are, full sprues, multi-pose,
Yeah.
complicated models. They're difficult to paint. They're not easy. They're fiddly by nature, I think. But as a kind of, it's a bit like Silver Tower in that it's a big hobby challenge, but as an actual like standalone box game, it's really fun. Like, I can imagine wanting to play these scenarios again.
Yeah.
I kind of wish there was a more modular game like this.
Yeah, it feels like you'd almost, auto-generate some of those scenarios in a way, or just come up with your own campaign with the same board pieces and,
yeah, I mean, I suppose you could come up with a kind of vague point system to figure out like what is a tactical marine equivalent to, just kind of swap in and out units and say that, okay, well, what if you only had half the amount of tactical marines, but you had Gygor, and what would that play like?
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
That's
like,
really cool.
Yeah, try things like that.
Yeah. I really love the game system. And
Yeah.
it's very fast and it's very easy to understand. In that sense, it would be accessible if it wasn't for the huge hobby project around it. And it's a beautiful thing as well. It's really beautifully made.
Yeah, we got some really nice photos.
Yeah.
It'll be on the show notes so you can go and see it, but there's a great photo from the end, which is actually just the way the miniatures ended up posing, because I posed my Terminator captain with him kind of like leveling his pistol at someone. There's a great, and my other Terminator is firing his dueling bolter the other way. There's a great kind of pose of them back to back, one firing a plasma pistol at one sister, another one firing a bolt gun at the other, with Ahriman just pointing. Ahriman's supposed to be casting a special power, but he's pointing.
Yeah. Like, kill that thing.
I might have to maybe do some touch-up highlights on Ahriman to establish how overflowing with the warp he is, though.
Yeah, bright green highlights everywhere now.
Because he literally just can't stop.
No, he's pouring out of
overflowing.
him.
Yeah. He's got a real bad warp plumbing problem. Like, whatever that is. He needs to get
Maybe he's just
someone
too
to look at
enraged. He's too emotional at this stage. You know, his home city is being assaulted by his own battle brothers.
His Primarch is having a sulk.
And it's down to him. It's all falling on him.
Yeah.
So
what a good moment in the heresy that is.
yeah. Poor Ahriman.
Poor Ahriman.
Poor everyone.
He just didn't want to turn into tentacles, and now he's ruined everything.
Yep.
But yeah, so that was our battle for the month. We should move on to some questions before we wrap up. Our first question comes from someone who signs off a person on the internet. However, I don't think they are regular Crate and Crowbar community Discord person, a person on the internet. I think there is two separate people.
Separate persons on the
Separate
internet.
anonymous persons on the internet. I think there's more than one person on the internet is what I'm saying.
Interesting.
But they write, Hello, Chris and Tom. As it seems to be the trend at the moment, I've recently reignited my interest in tabletop gaming, no small thanks to Miniatures Monthly. I attempted to get into the game back in junior high, secondary school? Question mark? Yes, I think. By buying the Space Marine starter box. I assembled and painted my models to represent the Dark Angels faction, mostly based on aesthetics. Upon completing my army, I realized the game was far too complex, and I quickly lost interest. With 8th edition now upon us, I'm ready to have another go. My question, though, is now that I'm much more concerned with the flavor of the different factions and armies, where should I start researching different factions and armies to learn about their lore and choose an army? I'm interested in reading about the 40k lore, but I'm baffled trying to find a starting point. I've taken an interest in the Death Guard, with them being featured in the fancy new box set, but I'm open to anything really. The Missus thanks you for reigniting yet another pricey hobby, alongside PC gaming and Magic the Gathering, both of which I've picked up in the past few years. Cheers! P.S. I no longer have the Marines I had all those years ago. I think they succumbed to my air rifle hobby that arrived a few years later. So it's a good question because there's a Lexicanum is the 40k wiki, which is good for kind of dipping into things and getting a sense. I think just picking, Horus Heresy books have been a good point for that kind of particular thing because they are quite fun and it does make a difference whether you receive your lore from a list of facts on an infinite wiki page and whether you receive it from a novel, I think. Yeah,
I agree. I think the Horus Heresy has been a really good point for me. I've not read a huge amount of 40k fiction at all, but the Horus Heresy informs so much of the 40k universe that it's almost like the bedrock you're getting for everything that's come since.
I think the other thing though is it's so rich that you can kind of dig in any direction and find stuff. Yeah. So I do think the kind of lore primer at the beginning of the new core book, which comes in the fancy set but is also separate, is very good for establishing the kind of, particularly the Imperium, but the sort of the setup of the universe. So maybe that's a good place to start because it allows you to, I mean, obviously by that point you've already invested, but if you're interested in Death Guard, then that'll give you some ways in. If you're interested in Death Guard specifically, then there is quite a lot of fiction for them in the starter set because they're in the starter set. They feature heavily in the novel Dark Imperium. And they feature very heavily in the Horus Heresy books after a while. So starting with book 4.
Yeah, that's when
they
really
start to really start to hang out with the
Mortarion.
It's
a big scythe.
Yeah. One of the clumsier themed Primarchs, I think.
Yeah. It's slightly awkward.
He looks a lot like Death.
Yes, and he smells poison, drinks poison all the time.
Yeah, he just loves it.
But why?
It's almost like he was doomed to fall to Nurgle or something.
It's strange.
Like, just loves poison.
Why did the Emperor build this man who loves drinking poison?
He represents the type
do that?
He represents the side of the Emperor that loves drinking poison.
There you go.
Obviously. And we didn't want him to be closely associated with Death, so we gave him a cowl, a scythe, and called him Mortarion. But that notwithstanding. Yeah, I think wikis, and then once you've found an angle you like specific models, I actually find that the place to start is probably how something looks, though. Yeah.
That's what it always comes down to. It's where all the fiction flows from as well, ultimately. Like, people look at the miniatures and they're told to write fiction about the miniatures.
Yeah. So, once you've, I think you need to know what you want to collect. Then you need to know if you like the backstory for that particular thing, or which faction within that thing you find most interesting. But that also then has to tie to a color scheme you actually care about. Because I don't care about, if you want to be a space vampire, but you hate painting red, then Blood Angels aren't for you.
That's true.
And then after that, just wiki holes. You can fall in infinite wiki holes.
Yeah.
Next question comes from Alex. Actually, this is not a question. It's just a nice statement.
Oh.
I thought I'd read it out because I wanted to say thanks to Alex for sending us a nice email. Just wanted to say thanks. Your discussion and positivity about Warhammer has meant I've finally done it. I've purchased the Start Collecting Chaos Space Marines box, and soon the bearers of the word will be spreading Holy Lorgar's word to the heathen forces of the false emperor.
Nice.
I've been wholly subsumed into the lore of 40k thanks to reading 30 plus Horus Heresy books recently.
Holy
Fucking
moly.
hell. He really does love word bearers. Like that was the correct thing. Like we love books and evil, which is true for multiple different
True
things.
disciple of Lorgar.
Yeah. But it was the idea that there's a place for people like me, i.e. less competitive, more narrative, social focused in the game that really made me bite the bullet. And that's down to you and your podcast. Anyway, thanks very much. Love your podcast. Look forward to the next installment. That's from Holy Alex of the Word. That's nice to hear. And actually, I think that's something it's a reason I'm comfortable being back in it, despite being a competitive person. I'm into Warhammer because I want to make fun stories about stuff.
It's very good at that.
It is very good at that. And, I think they're starting to accept that as well. Like, the very good Warhammer TV stream on Twitch is good for bringing out the stories in games, even if they're silly.
Yes, absolutely. They've got a good sense of humor about themselves and about the game, which is very important. And what has been kind of lacking from GW, been quite self-serious in the past.
Well, it's a weird contrast where the fiction is mega serious, with some exceptions. Orcs are silly, but the playing of the game is often a bit slapstick.
Yeah.
But also kind of epic at the same time, kind of like, our burning of Prospero games haven't been very silly.
No, that's true, actually.
Ahriman having too much warp is a bit silly, but it's also kind of a cool...
It looks awesome.
He just walked in a straight line for that entire game, just channeling infinite warp energy at people.
Yeah, zapping people into dust with it.
And, and even though I lost, from a story point of view, it's just like the Space Wolves have just had their asses kicked. They all died. Only 2 sisters got out. And I only lost 1 Terminator. Is that thing of
it's pretty great. That's a great result, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the opening image of the Space Marines the Space Wolves are scattered and they're just peering into the gloom and they just see this unnatural mist. And then suddenly these blaster bolts start hurtling out of the mist. And then a fucking crazy space wizard walks out and just evaporates your mate next to you with a lightning bolt, turns it into dust.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're screaming and falling back and retreating and laying down covering fire. And it's just, it's quite a terrifying image. And
it's also, I love the mental image of the Thousand Suns are, the Tzeentch Marines and they have magic powers, but they're still Marines. There's a good description in the Inferno book of how after the Council of Nicaea, they did openly adhere to the ban on psychic powers. So they just fought as a legion.
Yeah.
And so they can still do that. And so the guy who can slightly see into the future using it to guide his shots with his giant arm mounted autocannon. Those kind of mental images are
that's really, really awesome.
The reasons for playing the game, rolling the dice, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you for that email, Alex. That's very kind. Travis writes, hello. What's the worst miniature painting whoopsie you've made, and how did you recover? Love, Travis, aka TJ Howes on Discord.
I've not had a mega disaster since I've started back up in the last year. I think the Star Drake is the most stressful thing, but it's not a mistake because it's a second head. So you always make your mistakes on spare bits first before moving on. I've also testing my Skitarii colour scheme on a spare Liberator, because I picked up a pack of 3 for 10 quid. One of those clip snap fit packs you can get, just purposely completely for colour tests and for testing out colour schemes. So that's a recommended way of trying things out. It doesn't have to be anything like the model you want to ultimately paint, but you can see whether the colours work or not, whether the techniques work. Yeah,
I don't think I've had the biggest cock-ups I've done have been knocking things over.
Right.
So I lost a reasonable amount of Drakenhof Nightshade.
Oh, I've done that as well, yeah.
Wash to... Well, luckily to my cutting mat, so nothing got stained. And some Micro Sol decal setter. Lost some of that as well. In terms of fucking up models, it's more about, it's always recoverable, but it's always I use those fuck ups as a sign that oh, I'm tired. I've painted a lot of red over gold in the last week. Don't know if it shows, but I did have a moment where I just realized that I had entirely not painted 2 whole parts of a backpack. I just left it gold. And I was on to this, as I say, it's a 7-step process. I was on to step 5. I was I haven't even started. Why haven't I even started this one? And then had to syncopate it and do that one at a different pace to kind of bring up speed. That's not, I wish I had a funnier, I fucked something up story, but I don't really. I did accidentally glue one of my Thousand Suns to the jam jar I mount them on
Whoops.
by just painting the black trim around the base into the thing and having to cut him out. That was silly, but very recoverable.
Yeah, maybe it's people are scared of getting into it 'cause that maybe they think that putting paint on something is forever, but it really isn't. Like, you can ultimately strip paint, but also you can paint over stuff. As long as your paint's thin, it's all good.
Yeah, I think I accidentally cut a thumb off one of my Carrick Acolytes while taking him off the sprue.
Actually, I have, like, when I was first assembling my Stormcast, I've got loads of, like, knobbly bits on their hats. Well, there's little spikes that I've definitely snipped loads of those off by accident.
Yeah.
When I was starting.
I smoothed his thumb out with a file and he just got a little stumpy thumb now.
Awesome.
I mean, he's a mutant bird mask, birdman cultist.
It's not the
least weird thing
not
about
the biggest
him.
thing wrong with him, no.
Cool. So our next question comes from Stuart, who writes, since the triumphant return of robot booty Gingan Guilliman, I wonder how Marnius Calgar feels, the poor old fruit. Lord of Macragge, chapter master of the Ultramarines, and previously the ultimate blue badass, now relegated to a sideshow and massive pauldrons. Are there any other characters that have had an unfortunate fall from grace in the new edition of Warhammer 40,000? So we did mention Calgar earlier because he is in the book.
Yeah.
And he is sad. he can't look sad about it, but like he was, Lord of Ultramar, and now he's like, his new title is like Defender of Ultramar.
Kind of a cleric.
But the implicit subtitle there is like Defender of Ultramar while Guilliman is away doing the things you used to do.
Right.
Just don't fuck everything up again.
Yes.
I'll see you later, Dad. Like,
poor Calgar.
Yeah.
Has gone badly for him.
Yeah. Ultramar goes poorly with Calgar.
I can't think of many other. I mean, for every ordinary Space Marine, having a Primaris turn up is going to be a bit of a bummer.
Yeah. Wee little Cypher.
Yeah, poor Cypher. One of the most badass, one of the coolest characters in the whole thing, and now he's just like so tiny with his little guns.
I think Dark Angel suffered particularly because the HUDs make them look smaller anyway. And
yeah, it's true.
They look tiny next to Primaris. I suppose Ahriman got his ass kicked really badly by Ivrain, one of the Inari, the new Eldar Death things, because she met him in the webway because he's been trying to get into their library because he wants to reverse the rubric and turn his men back from dust, which is what they turned into.
Yep.
She cast a spell that turned the rubric Marines with him back to life, which is the thing he wants to be able to do.
Yeah.
Then she killed them.
Massive trolling.
So they can actually die. And he was so sad he left.
That's a low point. That's a real low point.
Yeah, exactly.
What a dick move.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he is just,
he's gone wrong, that one.
He is going to be wrong. Yeah. But yeah, trying to think anyone else has had a smackdown in the fiction that I've read. Not sure necessarily. Like, Magnus did lose the invasion of Fenris, but he got what he wanted.
Yeah,
his whole plan was to lose. Obviously.
Definitely a win for Zinch, that one.
It's why I play Zinch.
Yeah.
Like, my whole plan
even
was
when it goes wrong, it's the plan all along.
I think maybe the Blood Angels as a whole, because their home world is trapped on the wrong side of the big hole in space.
Yeah, bummer. Yeah, they've had a really rough time with it, but they've gotten some awesome battle stories out of it, which is what Space Marines really care about. So
yeah,
maybe they've
So
won.
I mean, ultimately, we're all winners.
Yes.
In the grim darkness of the far future, we're all winners. in the famous
in the new 40k.
Yeah.
Good.
Let's see. Ben writes, "Hey Chris and Tom, just wanted to ask your opinion on the introduction of power levels in Warhammer 40k 8th, and what do you see yourselves using most in future? In many ways, I can see the many benefits of being able to build an army list in less than 10 minutes, but at the same time, with lots of upgrades being included in the cost of the unit, there's a lot of room to abuse the system. Do you think this will be a major problem for 8th edition going forwards? Love the show, Ben." So power, people who don't know, power levels are like a big single number. So I think a unit of Primaris is like power level 4. And if you want to quickly balance the game, you can use them without digging into the granular points values for specific guns on specific men in specific ways.
Yeah.
I really like them, and I think I'm probably going to use them loads.
Definitely. I think it won't damage the game, because in contexts where it really matters in tournaments and things, everyone will be using points, and that will balance the specific bits of gear. If you want to just put some models down and get a story out of it, power levels are brilliant, because it makes better stories to have roughly balanced armies.
Yeah.
Even if there are slight imbalances contained within that.
And a lot of the narrative scenarios have imbalanced armies, but with some special rules to kind of balance things out. Because, like, stories aren't about equally matched forces, generally speaking.
No.
Right?
In fact, most battles are not about equally matched forces.
Yeah. History
history.
doesn't tend to be about equally matched forces. So having that sort of like slight wiggle room where it's like, I mean, obviously in a narrative scenario, you shouldn't be trying to be a dick about it either. So, you know, I think I mentioned, when we were taking a break earlier, but like something I'm thinking of doing is, maybe doing some Rubric Marines, some Thousand Suns to go with my demons for 40k, but giving them all warp flamers because that make them short ranged, but potentially amazing.
Yeah.
Because I think it'd be a cool unit, amazing against charges. But, that is in points a lot more expensive. It's like goes from being a 250 point unit of 10 Rubric Marines to being a 370 point unit. And so in that scenario, if I had that unit, I would probably say like, shall we just casually times its power level by 1.5 just to kind of
get it in the ballpark.
Yeah. But I think as long as you can agree to do that with your friends, just saying like, okay, we'll go for power level 80. This is about right. Let's play is good.
I think, it circumvents, the kind of list building that is really fascinating and fun for a lot of people, but really tedious for other people. And so it could be a significant barrier if you only had points, because you have to refer to so many different pages, so many different books, and actually sit down, like think about it with a calculator and a piece of paper and, you know, a pen. And it just as a way to get around that and let people just get straight to what they want to do. That I think power levels are a brilliant idea, especially when the points are still there and still balanced and will still be kept up to date with General's Handbook style updates. And that
yeah, it's a really good compromise. It feels a lot like how we've been playing AOS.
For sure, yeah.
Where it's like we do actually go on points values pretty exactly, but AOS points values are also a lot less granular than 40k.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's somewhere between those two things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. Nielsen writes, firstly, thank you for the excellent pod. I'm enjoying this apparent GW renaissance period among early mid-30-somethings that seem to start sometime in the past year. I too have renewed my White Dwarf subscription after over a decade away from the hobby, and have also dipped my toe in an Age of Sigmar starter box, and even ordered the shiny new 40k rulebook. Can you think of a particular reason for this uptake, other than suddenly having disposable income and a yearning for more innocent times? I noticed most of the talk began during the aftermath of 2 major votes last year. And a smaller secondary question, I read about Vanta Black and Black 2.0 recently and wondered what mini or part thereof you'd paint with this. Thanks for painting, everybody. Nielsen.
Good questions.
Should we do the Vanta Black thing first? Because it's
yeah.
So Vanta Black or Black 2.0 are like super black paints that actively like absorb light and look like little black holes.
Yeah, I'd paint my Sisters of Silence in that.
That's a really good idea.
Null, completely null. You look at it and they just like
Man,
just disappears into them.
That is a really good idea.
Yeah.
I don't think I've got a better idea.
I bet it's really expensive though. It'd be like a grand a pot or something.
Yeah, do the Sisters of Silence, Warlord Titan.
Because it's just a Titan-shaped silhouette, like hole in reality.
We'll keep tripping over it.
Yeah.
Man, that is really, like, because like most black armor is better painted sort of with highlights up to blue and grey, so it shines, so you don't get that kind of absence. So I tell you what, the monomolecular blades I did from Harlequins, I did black with highlights because I wanted them to look like they were themselves, almost like voids. I think Vanta Black swords for monomolecular blades would be super cool.
Yeah, that's nice.
There you go. So in terms of the whys of this, it is interesting because it is a trend. Like so many people of our age have hit this point in life. I wonder if, I don't know, maybe people who are in their 30s now are just of the right age where they were around for sort of GW's big push in the late 90s, big sort of, you know, ascent into popularity, lots of stores everywhere, and lots of people who get to this age start liking the things they liked as teenagers again. I don't know. Yeah,
I think it's part like classic midlife crisis stuff.
Quarter, Tom. I'm going for 100.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. But I know the phrase midlife crisis just overblows an completely honest instinct to do things you like to doing. But now with the resources available.
Well, I think the thing that makes it not a crisis is that it's not, I desperately want to be 14. Like, midlife crisis is traditionally, I desperately want to be 22 again. Right?
I
want a sports car and I want to date someone half my age.
Right.
Like, this is the opposite of that.
yeah.
This is like, I want to buy a dreadnought
And then paint it on
and
my
enjoy my stable relationship.
yeah,
you know what I mean?
it's true actually.
Like, it's actually, weirdly, I think it's not a mature thing to do, but I'm a little bit distrustful of hobbies that are viewed as mature, generally speaking. Like a lot of them have to do with like, well, going out and shooting something in the woods is probably viewed as a pretty kind of like manly and mature and outdoorsy hobby.
Yeah.
But I'd probably rather be into Warhammer on balance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like,
there's a lot of, this is a much bigger topic than we get into, but there's a lot of like, different attitudes towards traditional masculinity tied up in what men do with their spare time. We've always hit this because video games journalists. But I've generally found that most men that I've met that I've got on with have a hobby that genuinely excites them. Most people I've met in my life that I don't get on with don't. Or are only interested are like pulling and booze. You know what I mean? Like, there's a sort of it. Like, I think there's a sort of point in your life where you go like, I just kind of want to explore the things I'm interested in. And this happens to be it for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's a symptom of having an internal life in a way.
A symptom.
Yeah. It's hobbies or creative hobbies and storytelling hobbies and things that involve artistic activities such as drawing, painting, creating, and that kind of thing. We've said before, it's kind of an easy way of doing that stuff. I think part of it as well is that GW has gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. I think their ranges have gone up a notch. I think the way they're selling the hobby and talking about it is has the right attitude and makes it very appealing and, open to young people and people our age. Like, they're talking to everyone, basically.
That's very true. Like, I think had, my experience of, obviously I came in through a weird angle because I didn't do what you did and just walk into a GW store.
One day Tom walked into a shop.
To see what was what.
Yeah.
But I still had to have that moment and I was actually weirdly nervous about it. And like, the fact that I was, ended up having a conversation with a friendly man about stuff I was interested in and was surrounded by things that were quite interesting and vaguely affordable was a big difference from the GW I kind of remember. And that makes a big difference. And I think also broadly this ties into the resurgence of tabletop board gaming.
Yeah, definitely.
Far beyond GW. I think GW in some cases has been forced to respond to how big tabletop has gotten despite them. Weirdly, they'd cornered their part of the market.
Yeah, so that's very true.
And I think for a couple of years, they failed to profit from the fact that this stuff was getting bigger, except them. You know what I mean? Like Fantasy Flight were on the huge rise in a very similar industry, slightly different.
Yeah. I also wonder if, just the way we're socializing in Britain, at least, it's very generational, and maybe like a move away from just booze as socializing is actually encouraging people to find social activities that don't fit the kind of the mad 90s where it was just about getting trashed every week and that was people's free time. People still do that, but I think maybe the generation coming in is looking for new ways to socialize and new ways to hang out with each other.
Yeah.
That's
you're saying that millennials are basically into we're into brunches and Warhammer.
Yeah, man.
And Marxism.
All the good things.
Exactly.
But obviously that's a massive generalization.
Yes, it was a vast generalization,
yeah.
but like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure.
But I mean, maybe that stands, and this is again, this also press on these bigger topics that I'm fascinated by, but maybe beyond the remit of this podcast, but like, maybe that stands opposed to a kind of, the generation before that, the Gen X individualism. Like, a lot more people of our generation do board games with friends and sort of socialize more at home and stop going clubbing at a certain point.
Yeah.
Like, none of my friends in any walk of life still regularly go clubbing close to 30. Really, we all used to go quite a lot.
Yeah,
and then it just doesn't happen anymore. Like, everyone's doing something at home.
Yeah, and that's a lot of time you're getting back in your life, and it's still kind of time you want to treat as leisure time.
And money as well.
And money, yeah.
Like, like that's the thing. Like, this hobby is expensive, and I think it carries a price tag that people, until you kind of key your eye into the value of a little plastic man, seems extremely expensive. Sure. But really, to be honest, like, I don't think I spend, as a proportion of my income, I don't think I spend any more on this than I was previously spending on going out.
Yeah, you spend 50 quid easily on a night out.
Yeah. So the next time you're kind of like stroking your chin about a stock collecting box that you're not sure about, it's like, well, that's a meal and 2 drinks.
Yeah, interesting question that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one we'll think about more, I think, and talk about more.
It'd be nice to return to it, because I think it's
a lot more.
I'm like, it's exciting as well, because it's like, I'm off to a wedding next weekend, with, my partner's friends, like, not people that I know particularly well, but he, the groom, is somebody that I don't know particularly well, but because we're both of this generation of like resurgent 30-something Warhammer men, it's like instant. It's an instant connection.
Yeah.
Like you can go from having like a kind of like, oh wow, marriage. That seems, how's that gone? Are you having fun? What a nice weather it is kind of conversation to like, you know,
Straight into the plastic men.
Skaven within 30 seconds or something. You know what I mean? Like,
that's cool.
And that's, you know, that's a meaningful thing. Good question though. Next question comes from Rachel, who writes, "Dear pushers of tiny persons." And I think she means pushers as in the marketing arm of Games Workshop.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have bought boxes on their...
yeah, but I think it's, you know, it's what happens when you're genuinely enthusiastic about something, really. Not being a Warhammerer, thank you for introducing me to the Baroque surrealism that is the Age of Sigmar. I've picked up the first set of books and I'm looking forward to reading something that combines two of my favourite things, high fantasy nonsense and big men in fabulous outfits. Whenever I pass my local Warhammer shop and glance inside, I always find the detailed dioramas of the battlefields with their various chunks of architecture and other artistically made detritus of war very impressive. But do they actually add to the experience from a player's point of view? What makes a good one and a bad one? Any favourites? And do you have any ambitions yourself in this area as far as your own model making goes? All best, Rachel. So, yes.
I think for the type of players we are, having scenery and stuff and having all that extra scene setting paraphernalia sells the fantasy that makes us excited to paint it. And so it's amazing how much different it feels playing on a big board where everything looks great.
It justifies the time you put in.
Yeah.
Like, because it means that people go to Warhammer World to look at the dioramas. We saw them when we went to Warhammer Fest. And they're really exciting. But the great thing about the game when you have good terrain is that you look at the board with your models and my models, and because we both have that commitment to not using unpainted models, we've kind of created our own diorama on the fly. Sure. And it's not going to be as intricate or bespoke as the ones they customize for that purpose, but it's still like, you know, mentioned earlier, the moment at the end of our game of Prospero today, and that's just cardboard, nicely detailed cardboard boards that you play on.
Yeah.
But even then, that last moment had loads of atmosphere, and the posing and the models suddenly synced up in a way that was perfect. And it's kind of like, yeah, I can see this now. It's my mind's eye picture of what's going on. I've created a scene from one of those books I like. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was thinking about whether I'd buy some 40k scenery, and probably definitely will now.
Yeah. Well, so in addition to, obviously, I'd like to do an Army on Parade board. That's going to be a couple of months out, I think. But my big purchase. So I was at the UK Games Expo the weekend after we recorded the last podcast, actually. Oh, that was the miniatures thing I forgot to mention. I played in the X-Wing European Championships and came 95th. There we go.
Hooray.
It was pretty good.
Sounded good.
Yeah. I'm happy with top 100 in Europe. That's like, yeah,
sweet.
That's a nice thing to be able to say. But one thing I bought was a terrain board. So that's going to be a project for the summer. It's by a company called Secret Weapon Miniatures. It's a lot like the Games Workshop Realm of Battle boards, which are basically like massive plastic panels that lock together to create a 6 by 4 board. I wanted one of these because I have an IKEA dining table, which is 6.5 foot, fully extended, 6.5 foot by 3.5 foot-ish, which is really annoying because Warhammer is ideally 6 by 4. So it means that if I got a mat, it would droop over the edges of the table, which means getting an MDF board to support it, which at which point you might as well just make a terrain board. So because this is rigid plastic and locks together quite sturdily, I can actually just put this over the table and it'll look pretty good.
Yeah, awesome.
It's a big painting challenge because it means painting 24 1 foot by 1 foot panels,
Wow.
but it'll just be a shitload of dry brushing.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about that because I think it will instantly make our games look better. I'm going to do it as the same way I've been doing my Realm of Metal bases for my Age of Sigmar, but I'm angling it so that there's nothing specifically AOS about it, because I also kind of want it to be able to look like either the sort of, because I'm using some blue, but blue can just be nighttime. So it can either be like a nighttime wasteland, which is fine for 40k. It could be the surface of a moon or, you know, the outskirts of some Munitorum kind of Forge World thing. Or, I might try and do some terrain to turn it into the surface of the planet of the Sorcerers, which is where the Thousand Sons were exiled to, that exited warp, literally, over Prospero. So that planet, those two are now locked to each other, which is such an awesome kind of return to the Thousand Sons. So, that's going to be my big terrain project, I think.
That's exciting. The new kits for the modular 40k kits are very, very good.
Yeah.
So, and also because it's like 25, 30 quid a time, you could just get one every now and then, and because they keep on combining with each other in new combinations over the course of the year, you could have a really nice table.
Terrain was actually one of the things that I was really glad I was at Games Expo for, because there was lots of independent. I also, I think called Oathsworn, it's a company by a lady who just makes her own resin cast terrain pieces, and I bought some pieces, nice little ruins and a little arcane circle and stuff that I'll paint up.
Yeah, nice.
Perfect scale for AOS. But I'm always a bit wary about buying third-party stuff online because I can't just go look at it in a store.
Yeah.
But actually having those big expos where you can. So maybe next time you're at a board game expo or something like that, have a look to see if there's any of that presence by third-party manufacturers, because I did pick up some bits because they're not too expensive and nicely made. But when you can see them, you can instantly see whether or not it's going to look right with your models and that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool.
Our final question comes from Pete, also known as Fienia on Discord, who writes, "Hello, Miniature Face," which is not the name of this podcast, but maybe it should be.
Yeah.
"Where do you find folks stand on canon when it comes to your miniature armies? I find it very difficult to find a colour scheme to stick to when it comes to a custom colour scheme. It's really easy for me to stick with pretty much whatever the established canon is for my Dark Angels, but my Dark Eldar took a long time to settle on as I'm not following an established cabal. Is this, as I suspect, a sign that I'm a big old dork who loves to follow instructions?" Love the pod, Fienia/Pete.
But it's nice to feel as though your army's in that universe, the universe that you love, and the best way to do that is to make it part of that, part of a standardized set of color schemes and rules and unit values. So you actually feel like you're part of the ongoing history of that universe. That's a big, strong part of the fantasy. I think if you're going to go do your own color scheme, you have to be really kind of into the concept behind it. So creating this Forge world is going to inform massively the color scheme, and if I'm invested enough in the story behind it, then the color scheme will have that story ramifications for me. So it will feel natural to me as though it's in the universe, even if it isn't just, they're Mars red. So yeah, I think it's almost how you justify it to yourself that kind of lets you get into a paint scheme, a custom one or not.
Yeah. It's good that you can't really be wrong.
That's
true. I suppose Age of Sigmar is the one where it's the most freeing. Like, you don't really have to do anything you don't want to do. You can explain anything. But I feel the benefit of being moored in the universe somewhat. And I also really like, not just with color schemes, but the way that, like, for example, army structure diagrams in the fiction, which you're not obliged to stick to. The new 40k encourages something like that through the battalion system, but you don't have to. You can buy whatever collection units you want. However, there's part of me, like, I know Fee plays Bolt Action, which is historical war game. And I get the appeal of, like, having a regiment that is structured properly and has the right squad markings and paint markings and things to indicate where they all fit. That's one of the reasons that I'd like to do a Primaris Codex compliant company, is to eventually get to the point where I've filled all of the company requirements, even if they're smaller units that would normally be in a Space Marine company, because they're Primaris, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually have that as a little collection. You could say that this is my version of the Imperial Fist's 5th. That kind of thing. Really cool. I see the appeal of that.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe so, but equally, like, I think maybe it's because I sometimes feel a bit unmoored in my own imagination. Like, I come up with something and I'm like, is this right? Whereas if I can follow some instructions, I'm like, I have done law.
It's law compliant.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe, I mean, it's the paint by numbers thing, right? It's easy to be creative if someone else has given you the structure, which is what miniatures painting is. I think you pointed that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so it's fine. Also, following those, here are some suggested paint cut schemes things is a good way of having someone do the hard work of picking your spot colors for you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. That's going to be the hardest decision I have to make about my Skitari.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the spot color?
The thing I've come up with recently is lights and eyes are a really good common spot color to have for an army. I think it really is a good way of tying it together. I found that sort of started with the green flame on my Siege, which is like, they all look so different, but that holds them together. Like,
it even comes down to questions like, what color will the plasma weapons be?
Yeah.
Blue, red. These are important decisions.
I think about this a lot.
Yeah, me too.
My Thousand Suns have fire plasma weapons, so that like hot, because I mean also like the sun imagery. So yeah, and also the art for them seems to support that. My Nurgle are going to have red. That's going to go down to red because it looks kind of glowering.
It looks really good with
yeah.
Yeah, the official paint jobs of the
Because it looks almost dirty.
Looks really
I really
good,
like the way
yeah.
it looks. Space Marines, we'll see. I really like in Dawn of War 3, the plasma weapons are white, which I've never seen done, and it's really hard to do on a miniature.
Yeah, I wonder how you paint that.
But it looks cool.
These are the questions that keep us up at night.
Yeah, indeed.
Miniatures Monthly.
What colour is your plasma? I do love the look of a good plasma gun.
Yeah.
But that is all the questions that we've got this month. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you'd like to send us a question for a future episode or next month's episode, you can do so by emailing us at miniatures@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also follow us now on Twitter at Minis Monthly. We have a dedicated Twitter feed where me and Tom post work in progress pics of the stuff we're doing as we go, when we remember. It's good.
Yeah, it's nice.
And if you would like to hang out with the Crate and Crowbar community generally, you can do so on our Discord, which is on the website at crateandcrowbar.com, or there's a link to it. But also specifically on our Discord, there's a channel, Table Talk, that is where all of the miniatures people, not the miniature people, it's where the people who like Plastic Men, they go there. If you'd like to follow us individually, Tom, how can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Twitter at PCGUludo, which is spelled LUDO.
And I'm on Twitter at CThurston, which is CTHURSTEN. And I have an Instagram for miniatures, which I haven't updated in ages, but will probably do so soon with some Harlequins and stuff, which is Instagram.com/exit warp, which is a bit like if something exits the warp, like they do in space.
Lots of warp. Exited Araman today.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, sometimes you exit the warp, sometimes the warp exits you.
That's what it's like to be alive in the 40k universe.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for